It is 7 o'clock on Monday, the 1st of January, and a very happy new year to you. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Here are our top stories. The UK rings in the new year with a nod to the coronation in London's biggest ever firework display, while tens of thousands of people took to New York's Times Square for the iconic annual ball drop. Also ahead, NHS leaders warn this week's six-day strike by junior doctors will put patients at serious risk. The Defence Secretary says the UK is ready to take direct action against Houthi rebels in Yemen after the targeting of cargo ships in the Red Sea. The former federal prosecutor tells Sky News he expects Donald Trump will be convicted of at least one of the charges he's facing as the former president eyes a return to the White House. And the earliest version of Mickey Mouse now belongs to the public as Disney loses its copyright of the iconic cartoon.
In the sport, Arsenal missed a chance to go top of the Premier League at New Year with defeat at Fulham. And 16-year-old Luke Littler returns to action at the Darts World Championships this afternoon. He plays Brendan Dolan in the quarter-finals.
A very good morning to you, and once again, Happy New Year to you from everyone here at Sky News. Now, 2024 has been welcomed in across the world with fireworks, drones and lasers lighting the skies from Sydney to New York. And despite the slightly damp weather in the UK, tens of thousands of people turned out for street celebrations. In London, a theme of unity was the focus for the famous fireworks display, which the capital's mayor said were the biggest the city's ever seen. A nod too to the King's coronation and the 75th anniversary of Windrush. Well, Becky Johnson was watching for us from the banks of the River Thames.
As 2024 began, London put on a show. A 12-minute spectacular lit up the capital. The display billed as the biggest the city has ever seen. The theme of unity beamed across the night sky. It was a celebration of diversity and also marked the year of the King's coronation.
With the coronation of Charles III and Camilla.
Up in Edinburgh, 50,000 people packed the streets to see the iconic castle burst into life.
It's been amazing. It's the first time doing something like this. It's incredible.
The UK's celebrations followed a succession of displays around the world, Sydney among the first to see in the new year. While across Europe, world-famous landmarks were lit up to welcome 2024. In New York, thousands gathered for the annual ball drop in Times Square. While in Brazil, they partied on Copacabana Beach. Back in London, there was relief the forecast rain held off. For people who gathered to watch, it was a night to remember.
Where they saw that the kid is just blowing the balloon, and then suddenly the fireworks started. It was really amazing scene.
2024 welcomed in style. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Central London.
Well, a particularly happy new year to those on Mountain Time in the US who've just ushered it in the last 5 minutes. In the next hour, we'll go live to Las Vegas for those on Pacific Standard Time as they usher in the new year as well. Now, here in the UK, later this week, junior doctors in England will walk out for 6 days in what will be the longest continuous strike in the history of the health service. But NHS leaders are warning that action will put patients at serious risk during what they say is traditionally the busiest week of the year for the NHS. It comes as the number of days lost to strikes in 2023 is expected to set a new record for this millennium, according to figures from the Resolution Foundation. Well, let's get more on all of this with Ashna Hiranag, who's here on set with me. Starting when exactly? These 6 days in a row?
Yeah, that's right. So it involves nearly half of all junior doctors across England. It means that they will walk out essentially from 7 a.m. on Wednesday up until the 9th of January, so up until next Tuesday. It will mean it will total about 144 consecutive hours where there are going to be gaps on those rotas. So not a very happy new year if you're a member of staff having to figure out how to plug some of those gaps. And it would coincide, the NHS Confederation say, with the busiest week that local NHS services would be having. They're dealing with those winter pressures. This is going to be a particular pinch point for them, coupled with the fact that hundreds, if not thousands, of their junior doctors will be walking out. And they are warning the Confederation that NHS trusts are going to be in a vulnerable position. They are also urging the government and the BMA union to resume talks so there can be some sort of lasting compromise. The union wants a 35% pay rise to restore real earnings to 2008 levels. The government says they are not willing to sit down and resume talks up until industrial action is called off. But there is this agreement in place that striking doctors will be called back if there are any major incidents, or recalled rather, back onto the wards if there are any major incidents. There have already been some requests for that which have yet to be honoured. So there is definite concern there for other members of staff working within those hospitals, but also patients too, who'll be eagerly, awaiting to see if their surgery is going ahead or not.
Well, Ashna, thanks very much for that summary. And by the way, a little later on this morning, in about half an hour, we'll be getting the thoughts of Matthew Taylor, the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. Make sure to tune in for that. About 7:40, actually, not 7:30. Ashna, thanks. Let's take a look now at the other stories making headlines this morning. A 68-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of a double murder at a property in Staffordshire. Police were called to a house in Park Lane in Cheadle at 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon, where 2 women were pronounced dead. Staffordshire police are appealing for anyone with information to get in touch. Manchester City footballer Jack Grealish has released a statement after thieves raided his Cheshire home on Wednesday night while his side were playing Everton. The England forward said it had been a traumatic experience for him and his family. Cheshire police say that no arrests have been made and inquiries are ongoing. Energy bills for most people in the UK will rise by around 5% from today after the regulator announced an increase in the energy price cap. It means the average household will pay an extra £94 per year in gas and electricity. Thousands of parents whose children are suffering with poor mental health are reportedly turning to a charity for help. Figures from Young Minds show around 13,000 parents contacted the charity's specialist helpline last year. A further 2,800 mums, dads and carers called the line in need of urgent crisis support. More people than ever are getting tested for cancer. New analysis by NHS England shows almost 3 million patients were seen in the last 12 months. The figures show the number being tested is up by more than a quarter compared to the same period from before the pandemic. From today, women will save up to £2 on period pants as the government scraps VAT after a 2-year campaign. While the so-called tampon tax was dropped from other period products back in 2021, the pants were classed as a garment, meaning they were still subject to the 20% VAT rate. Now, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, has said the UK will not hesitate to take direct action against Houthi rebels who've been targeting ships in the Red Sea. His comments come after the US destroyed 3 boats belonging to the Iran-backed Yemeni rebel group yesterday. The intervention was made when US warships answered a distress call from a Maersk container ship as it came under attack from Houthi militants. The group had been targeting vessels in the Red Sea since November in a show of support for Hamas. Well, writing in today's Telegraph newspaper, the Defence Secretary said, "We are willing to take direct action and we won't hesitate to take further action to deter threats to freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. The Houthis should be under no misunderstanding. We're committed to holding malign actors accountable for unlawful seizures and attacks." Well, as Denmark welcomes in the new year, they too will be welcoming the prospect of 2024 with a new monarch. Queen Margrethe, who's been on the Danish throne since 1972, announced she's to abdicate in 2 weeks' time. In her speech, she mentioned how recent back surgery and thinking about the future were some of the key reasons for handing on the responsibility to the next generation.
Den 14. januar
On the 14th of January 2024, 52 years after I took over from my beloved father, I will step down as Denmark's Queen. I hand over the throne to my son, Crown Prince Frederik.
Well, about 8:15, we'll be live to Denmark's capital, Copenhagen, to get more reaction on that surprise announcement. Now, new restrictions from today mean international students studying in the UK will no longer be able to bring their families along with them. The new visa restrictions are part of a government crackdown, which the Home Secretary says will cut migration by tens of thousands. Our political correspondent, Rob Powell, has all the details.
So these were measures announced in May. They were being pushed by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. It will mean that the only overseas students that will be able to bring family members with them when they come to study in the UK will be those on postgraduate research courses or government-sponsored courses. Now, it went down pretty well with Tory MPs. The Labour Party as well said that they would back it. There has been some concern from the university sector. In the last day or two, we've heard university vice-chancellors saying that international students were already pulling out of their courses. There is some concern about what that might mean for funding. It's a lucrative stream of income for universities. Because of that, at the time that these measures were being discussed, there was a little bit of resistance and tension from the Education Secretary. I think she was pretty much happy with where they landed, though, but was a bit worried about the government potentially going any further in terms of restricting overseas students. Now, the first part of the new year as well will likely see the return of controversial legislation to Parliament connected to the Rwanda deportation scheme. Rishi Sunak got that through the Commons in its initial stage last month, despite a mooted rebellion. But there's lots of MPs that want changes, so that is a likely clash we will see in the weeks and months ahead as well. We'll also find out whether the Prime Minister has hit his target to bring down the legacy backlog of asylum claims. He had said he wanted to clear that by the end of 2023. By the end of November, there was still over 100,000 people waiting on that list. So we should get figures for that in the coming weeks as well about whether he has managed to clear it. So the government trying to sort of pump out an announcement about migration and trumpet a success. But I think if we're being honest, if you look at it, there are far more problems for Rishi Sunak to wrangle with as the first weeks of 2024 go by than there are solutions or successes.
Rob Powell for us there. Meanwhile, endless queuing at the end of your holiday could soon be a thing of the past under new plans to streamline passport control. According to the Times newspaper, new e-gates are set to be installed at airports, which will allow travellers arriving in the UK to pass through without having to present their passport physically. This new frictionless travel will instead rely on facial recognition technology, with trials set to begin this year. Well, at 9:30 today, we'll be looking ahead to the coming political year, in which the prospect of a general election is sure to dominate. That's with the chief political commentator for The Independent, John Rentoul, and Joe Twyman, the director of Delta Poll. That's also set to be a huge political year in the United States, with voters heading to the polls in November for a presidential election. Despite facing 91 charges across 4 criminal trials, former President Donald Trump could still be in the White House once again. In fact, he's many people's favourite. Well, an ex-federal prosecutor has told Sky News he believes it's highly likely that Mr. Trump will be convicted in at least one of the cases that he faces. Our US correspondent James Matthews has this report.
The singing you hear is coming from inside this prison. January 6 prisoners behind bars in Washington, D.C. Every night around 9 p.m. they sing their national anthem, relayed by phone to supporters who gather outside.
Stephen Cappuccio, Matthew Caspel, Donald Chilcote.
They recite a January the 6th prisoner
Richard
list.
Harris, Hero. Joshua Haynes,
Hero.
Isaiah Farnsworth,
Hero.
In 2024, will the name Donald Trump be added?
Hello, Frank.
Prosecutors say he inspired Capitol rioters.
My name's James Matthews. I'm from Sky News in the UK.
We put that to one. Frank Justino.
I was not inspired by anybody to do any sort of conviction. The way I see it, I never really committed a crime. A lot of people didn't commit any crimes. They were just there to peacefully protest.
you'll probably see the jury...
The test of criminality lies in Trump's courtroom calendar. He faces 4 criminal trials.
91 felony charges. I think all of these cases, he faces real legal jeopardy.
We asked former prosecutor Glenn Kirshner to talk us through the Trump trials ahead.
What that will do is it will probably...
The 4th of March is marked down as the start date for his January 6th trial.
We fight like hell.
He's accused of efforts to overturn the result of the 2020 election, leading to riots at the Capitol.
I think the odds of a conviction are extremely high. I believe that the testimony we will see will come from a chorus of Republican voices. It makes it much more difficult for a defendant, for Donald Trump, for a fellow Republican to say they're all out to get me. Interestingly, the one in New York is set for trial.
After March the 4th, March the 25th is penciled in for the New York State trial on hush money payments to a former porn star and alleged false accounting.
Will you come speak to us, President Trump?
The next due date in court is for the alleged mishandling of classified documents at his Florida home. That's on the 20th of May.
Mr. Trump, why were you holding nuclear secrets, sir?
Charging Donald J. Trump with felony violations of our national security laws.
In the state of Georgia, the prosecution has asked for an August the 5th trial date on charges of trying to overturn the 2020 election result.
Arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results.
They won't all take place before Election Day on November the 5th, but the January 6th trial should.
Nobody knows if he will go to jail, but I believe the judge, I believe the prosecution team, as headed up by Jack Smith, understand that if you don't punish that dramatic wrongdoing, those democracy-busting crimes, then you're giving the next aspiring dictator a green light to do it all over again.
Donald Trump's court diary will intersect sharply with the campaign trail. The trial of his alleged involvement in riots over there will begin in the courtroom here the day before Super Tuesday, a big voting day in terms of the selection of presidential candidates. Then there's a Republican convention in July. The party may be faced with the choice of a convicted criminal as their candidate for the White House.
So, Father, we ask that you allow...
Prison and the prospect of conviction complicate the politics for Donald Trump. A recent poll showed that in key battleground states, if he's convicted, 6% of voters would switch their vote to Joe Biden. It could be enough to swing the election. How the politics play out will be a concern for the former president, but it won't be the only one. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
To the war in Ukraine now, where there's been an escalation in fighting between Kiev and Moscow. Friday saw Russia's biggest missile strike of the war so far, where missiles hit Ukraine's largest cities, killing at least 30 people. This was followed by claims of a retaliation by Ukraine on the Russian city of Belgorod, which left 24 people dead. Well, joining me now is Rudik, member of the Ukrainian parliament and leader of the political party Golos. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, and a happy new year to you. I mean, I guess it's an odd thing to wish you at a moment like this. How is morale at the moment?
Hello, Wilfred. Thank you so much for having me. Happy New Year to you as well. The morale is good. We did not know if we would survive by this point, and we did. And it is so important that we are here and we keep fighting, and we know that we are not alone. We understand that the year in front of us, it will be incredibly hard. And people are exhausted indeed. And many of Ukrainians have spent their New Year's night in the bomb shelters. We know that there are many days in front of us spending in the bomb shelters. But we also know that we have no other choice, absolutely no other choice than to fight. And this is what we are going to do.
You mentioned that you know you're not alone. Do you feel a little bit more alone, perhaps a little bit less supported than say 6 months ago, given the way that some votes have been going in the US and in the EU around financial and military support?
Well, you know, as a politician, of course, I am incredibly worried that we entered 2024 without the confirmed, signed and sealed support from the US and the European Union. And we will do everything that is needed from our side to make sure we secure the support. Unfortunately, I think right now it is not on us. But as Ukrainian and as a person who has so many friends throughout the world, I can tell you people are still with us. And we know that people are still cheering for us and sending humanitarian aid and pushing their politicians to do the right thing. And we are incredibly grateful for this, that we know that no matter what happens in the world, we are fighting for the right thing, and people of the free world see this.
Do you think that if the funding from the EU and the US does not come through, let's say, in the first quarter of the year, the first 3 months, will that be critical for Ukraine's chances of holding on or winning this war?
So it will be critical, and it will be excruciating for us if the support is not coming. So like all the taxes that we are gathering in Ukraine right now, we are spending on our army, on our military. The international support is being spent on the social payments, so our state can execute on the obligations that we have. And if this is not coming, then we will be in an incredibly tough spot, because we will have to make the decision on like how to use our limited resources. And there is like not a good solution there. So I do really hope that all the political promises, like we are standing with you for as long as it takes, they will come to life, and they will become true, signed and sealed, and the money will be coming to Ukraine.
What is the view domestically now towards President Zelensky? Is his support as high as ever? Is it universal still?
You know, one wise man once told me that there is not a university in the world that would teach you to be a president at the time of the war and member of parliament at the time of the war. And people are indeed exhausted, and people are asking some questions on like if this is the right decision, or that is the right decision. But we know that our main strength is unity. So we are trying to maintain that, and maintain that with the support of President Zelensky. We may not agree with some of the things, but look, we are in 2024. We have survived by this moment, and he is leading the country to that. So I think standing together is one of the things that we'll need to do in 2024, even stronger than we have done before.
And I guess just finally going back to, you said already that, you know, we have to fight on no matter what. But what if President Zelensky came under significant pressure from someone like President Biden or Ursula von der Leyen to find some kind of settlement in the year ahead with Russia? Is that something that you think he could sell to the Ukrainian people, that he would even choose to do so? Or is that out of the question?
Absolutely not. You know, by this time, I have not seen or met any person that would tell me, oh, we should think of the negotiations, we should figure something out. And I think it's a very strong feeling, plus the recent sociological studies showing that people are not considering it as any of them opportunity or possibility. You know, we have seen already what it means to have a deal with Russia. And because the war started not in 2022, it started in 2014. And we know exactly what to have peace or agreement with Russia means. They will just gather their forces and they will attack us again. And as of right now, there is not a single person or an organization in the world that can vouch that Putin will keep his part of the deal. And this is why we know that our plan is only one. It's to fight and defend ourselves.
Kira Rudik, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
It is time to take a pivot now and to have a catch-up on all of the day's sport, which is James is here with me. And so we're still in this busy period with the Premier League run over, or there's more to come?
Yeah, a couple of games to come. Got a big one tonight, Liverpool versus Newcastle, which, if you go back through history of the Premier League, they've produced some thrilling 4-3. I think there was back-to-back 4-3 games. If you can go that far back, that's probably showing our age, because you're nodding, you remember it as well. You know, we all do. One person who won't remember
Stan Collymore with a late win.
Yeah, that was it.
Correctly.
One person who won't remember it, Luke Littler.
No.
16 years old. Unbelievable. New Year's Eve, what was he doing? Probably getting early night, because he's about to go on stage this afternoon at the World Darts Championship for a chance to potentially get into the World Darts semi-final.
Some nice earnings already.
Nice earnings already. Beats Raymond van Barneveld in the last round. I mean, it gets me thinking, I don't know about you, but it gets me thinking, what was I doing at 16 years old? What were you doing at 16 years old?
Well, I was at school, obviously, doing very, very little indeed. And he also enjoyed the one of the games yesterday as well, as an A-list star celebrity guest that he is now.
Every single footballer is trying to get a picture with Luke Littler at the moment, it seems. Doesn't matter where they go. And 16, yes, I was in school too. I was studying a lot harder than Wilf was. Moving on. Anyway, coming up in the sport, we'll preview Luke Littler's quarter-final match this afternoon at the World Darts Championship, and we've got goals from yesterday's Premier League action.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Take us back to June the 7th, ahead of the game, because you'd had such an amazing run to the final. Were you quietly confident?
I was, and I remember coming in and saying, you know, how did the other semi-final go? And they said at the moment Baal's beating Fiorentina. I went, oh good, I think we might have a better chance against Baal than Fiorentina. And next time we come out, they said Fiorentina have won the game. I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be much tougher. So I went into it knowing that, you know, our record in Europe had been pretty good, we'd done okay, but this was probably going to be one of our biggest tests. And obviously Fiorentina, I had played against them before with Everton, and they had knocked me out in penalty kicks in the quarter-final of the Europa League. So Fiorentina, maybe, you know, I was worried that maybe, is it one of these bogey teams I've got?
When Said Benrahma scored the penalty there, what was going through your mind at that point? Did you start to believe this could be your night?
I always believed that we had a good chance of winning the game. When Said went up to take the penalty kick, he's been so good with them, I felt confident that we would get it. But, you know, I never knew how the game was going to go after that, and obviously they got back into it as well. I was more disappointed that we'd sort of lost a goal, and I thought in the end it wasn't a great goal to give away. So we had to go and do it again, and I'm thinking to myself, look, this is probably going to go to penalty kicks or extra time, and how's this going to go? I just felt that the game was going to be tight. I didn't think there was going to be an awful lot between the teams. There was going to be small margins quite often, which there is.
That moment when Jarrod Bowen gets that goal, when he's going for the goal, it must have taken forever to almost go. What was
I
going
can still
through your head
remember the feeling of that. I was walking down as if to say, come on. And Jarrod was in good form, scoring form. I thought, go on, he's someone who wants to score. It's a great moment, it really was. And look, one will remember. I'll remember greatly as a manager. For West Ham as a football club, brilliant moment, because let's be fair, I don't think West Ham have been round too many cup finals, and then to get one in Europe, you know, even more special, and more importantly to go and win it.
There's a lovely moment as well when you put that medal around your dad's neck. What did he say to you?
You know, my dad comes to games, he's been a great support, went to most of the games in Europe. You know, my brother took him, and it was great that he got to see them at his age he is. And it was a bit like, you know, it seemed that everybody was down at the pitch, and I saw my dad, so I just said, come down, I'll say hello, because I was more worried that maybe I didn't get to see him after the game, or just the whole thing get caught up, we didn't get a chance. So I came down and I put the medal around his neck, and it seemed to hit a note with quite a lot of people.
Oh, it did. And for you personally, I think that game was your 1097th. This was a major trophy for you. Was there a part of you that thought, I'm never going to experience that in this career?
Well, look, when you come to West Ham and you say, I'm going to win a European trophy, I think supporters of other football clubs would have probably laughed at that. But we have done, and we've gone on and done it. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to come and have some effect at West Ham. But when we took over 3-4 years ago, we were relegation, probably in relegation battle. Now we're a team who's getting talked about.
Should we talk about the dancing?
Yeah, you can talk about the dancing.
No regrets. I mean, it was another
absolutely.
lovely moment.
None, and if you give me a chance to do it again, I'll be the first one to try that dancing
Brilliant.
stuff out again.
It was
certainly.
fabulous. When you got back here, you'd have been, I guess you came back to the club. Was that a real hero's welcome?
When we came back, we were able to do an open top bus.
Sure.
It was incredible. It's a beautiful night. Everybody was out. But it got a chance. We brought all the people, all the staff, everybody involved at the club. And I think since I come back, probably one of the biggest things I've been more impressed with is the people who work at the club.
And in terms of that parade, was that the moment where you kind of, it sunk into you what it meant to the local community?
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
James, thanks there for the sport. Time for a look at the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Geraldine has just about gone, but rain and strong winds will return to southern parts later today. It's fairly chilly out of town with a frost and a scattering of showers in the north, but southern parts are mostly fine. The morning looks calmer than recently, with sunny spells for most. Showers in the north will largely fade, but South Wales, southwest England and the south of Ireland will cloud over, with outbreaks of rain taking over by midday. It'll be a bit milder than yesterday. Northern Ireland, Ireland, Wales and southern England will turn wet and windy later on.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now from today, the earliest images of the world's most famous cartoon mouse are no longer the property of its creator, Disney. It means the public will now be able to use images of Mickey and Minnie from their first ever appearance in the animated short film Steamboat Willie, one of the first cartoons to synchronise sound and images. US law allows copyright to be held for 95 years, meaning modern versions of the Disney mascot remain unaffected. You're watching Sky News Breakfast, and still to come, we'll have a run through the stories in today's newspapers, including this one on the front page of the Daily Mail about the government looking to close loopholes surrounding gender on official documents.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
This is a 4-lane dual carriageway, completely shut off. Some things are being allowed in, but actually the only thing we've seen coming out is an ambulance. The message from China is clear. This is a modernised military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed. Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey.
By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place, and it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
The world is watching what's happening here.
Welcome back to Sky News Breakfast. We have a little bit of breaking news to bring you. An earthquake with a magnitude of 7.4 has hit north-central Japan, and the public broadcaster has been announcing that a tsunami warning has also been issued. We're going to monitor any further information we get on that. 7.4 magnitude earthquake in Japan, according to the state national broadcaster. Now, as planned, we're going to go back to the newspaper review, and with me here to discuss Emma Wolf, the author and broadcaster, and the presenter and writer Matthew Salden. Very good morning to you again. Good to see you. So let's start off, Emma, I think it's with your story. I need to get up this printout again. On the Mail front page on gender on documents.
Yeah, so this is about changing gender on official documents, such as, most notably passports and driving licences. And at the moment, there is this kind of loophole where you can actually acquire a new gender on these documents, official documents, passport, driving licence, just with a doctor's note. For your driving licence, you would need a very simple statement from a lawyer. And so ministers are now looking at possibly closing this loophole. Doing it this way, doing it via your doctor, who all the doctor needs to say is a medical profession has to state that your transition is likely to be permanent and that they have to give evidence that you changed your name. So it is quite a big loophole, and it's much simpler than changing your legal sex with a gender recognition certificate, which is it's a less straightforward process. And yeah, ministers are looking at closing this loophole. So that it would actually be a lot harder. This is a kind of worry about just this simple self-identification.
Would that suggest you have only actually changed it on a document, not officially, even if most people would read a passport or a driver's licence as being official?
Yeah, well, I think what the government are suggesting, and there's sort of not that much detail on it yet, is that you would need a more formal certificate, a more official certificate, like this gender recognition certificate.
Matthew, next story we are going for from The Times, and it's about frictionless travel.
It's such an interesting story, this, and it's going to affect a lot of us moving forward. And it basically means that we're going to get to a point quite soon, probably, where we don't have to get our passport out when we come back into Britain, because it will just simply recognise our facial recognition. And this is inspired by a chap called Phil Douglas, who's the Director General of the Border Force, and he seems to have been impressed by an experience he had personally going to Australia, where he didn't have to get his passport out of his baggage. So trials of this technology are going to happen later this year, it seems.
And it stems from a bit of anecdotal trials from the head of the Border Force, it sounds like. I mean, I think, Emma, this would be something that most people would embrace. I mean, if you rewound even 5 years, but certainly 20 years, even the idea of having ID cards scared a lot of people. This will obviously require your facial recognition data to be stored somewhere, but it's probably something people will welcome because of the trade-off of no queuing.
I think most people, if they feel they could just walk through, would be amazing. I'm sure there will be other delays, and I'm sure there will still be queues. I do wonder, in the minute you said facial recognition, I thought, oh, I can see people go, I don't want this data, I don't want my face to be scanned and stored, and all of this. People are very weird.
I have no problem with it myself. I mean, I plaster myself all over social media anyway.
I know, exactly. Most people don't have a problem with it, but there's just something about when you say ID cards. I mean, even last night with the New Year's Eve celebrations, people, why do I need ID cards to go to the river, to go to the Thames? Why? All of this kind of stuff. There's something about it that is a trigger to people, even though it's your face. It's not
But to Matthew's point, I mean, private companies already have all of our facial recognition data, so it's sort of adding it to the government.
And there is a difference between someone storing data about your face, which you wear publicly wherever you go, and actually having to carry a bit of ID on you as you go about your business in your own country. I think there is a philosophical difference and also obviously a practical difference.
It'll be interesting to see if that works and how quickly
What about people who've had cosmetic surgery and things like that?
Well, presumably you'd have to update your passport photo anyway, if that was the case. If it's significant surgery, I don't know what the details are on that. But anyway, let's move on to the next one. Emma, you've gone for the Telegraph front page. We've been talking about this a lot during the show. Significant. Grant Shapps, UK ready to attack Houthi rebels.
Oh, actually, this is Matthew.
Oh, Matthew switched.
Yeah, we swapped. I think you were going to do clean air, weren't you?
The air pollution one on the front of The Guardian. Doctors have been told, well, this is a call for doctors to really consider the health risks and the adverse sort of health consequences of air pollution and to look at patients' postcodes and work out, you know, these fine particulate matters, the nitrogen dioxide, all of these levels of really quite damaging air pollutants vary across postcodes. About 10 years ago, a little girl died at Great Ormond Street, and there's a report has come out showing that the levels of air pollution were very, very high. It can really exacerbate asthma, you know, which can be severe in children and many people. So this is a call for those risks and for doctors to give that information to parents, to carers, to families.
It's very interesting. Could even affect house prices. I mean, my area of West London, I think, is particularly polluted. Yeah. And we may get to a point where people actually say, no, thanks, we don't want to live in an area like that. As a sort of relatively young dad, I mean, I'm not young, but my child is young, 15 months, I now notice when I wheel him around in his pushchair that the exhaust pipes are absolutely at his lungs. And I'm someone who uses my car. I tried to use it less than I did, New Year's resolution, use my car less. But nonetheless, it is in all of our interests to clean up our air as much as we reasonably can.
And the difference between, I don't know, I live near a major roundabout in Old Street, and the difference between the air pollution there and then a few streets back in the residential streets where we live can be huge. So there's calls for, you know, children not to be walking along main roads to school, to go just to go different routes. It does make a big difference.
Some progress has been made by Sadiq Khan, despite all the protests about ULEZ and so forth. But I think you can notice it when you go out to smaller towns or villages, obviously particularly the countryside. The difference between central London and those areas is enormous.
But it is worth noting the progress even in a major city like London, because having recently lived in New York, you come back to London and it feels like you've moved to the countryside. I mean, genuinely, it is noticeably different, the air quality, something which you wouldn't perhaps have noticed in previous years or decades. Let's move on to the last story, which I already have introduced, and I can tell I'm working with two broadcasters here because you already corrected my order mishap seamlessly. But Matthew, let's go to Grant Shapps' Telegraph and what the UK is willing to do.
Yeah, so there's no talk of the UK being actually at war, but in effect, that we are moving to a state of a form of war with these rebels from Yemen. They've been trying to overthrow the Yemeni government there, the government in Yemen backed by Saudi Arabia for some years, and they are trying to disrupt trade in the Red Sea, which of course leads to the Suez Canal, which is an absolutely key shipping route. I mean, remember the Suez crisis back in the 1950s. It's that important. And what these rebels have been doing is trying to attack ships. I think initially that they thought might be trying to service Israel, but perhaps that has broadened out beyond that. And the UK government and the Americans are saying, enough of that, we simply cannot allow this to go on. So Grant Shapps seems to be giving the go-ahead for British forces in the coming days, if these attacks continue, to actually strike at these rebels.
And the question, Emma, of course, is whether some small intervention initially could spiral. At the moment, you know, we're not involved militarily in the region, but there'll be close focus on what happens.
Yeah, it's a really alarming situation, as Matthew says, is unfolding in a key, absolutely key sort of flashpoint. But I think, you know, Shapps obviously feels that he needs to talk tough at this point.
The big thing here is that the Iranian involvement, because these Houthi rebels, they're doing this, I should have spelt it out, because they are backing Hamas, because they oppose Israel. They are actually Sunni Muslims, whereas Hamas are largely, I think, Shia Muslims. But because they are backed by Iran, this could develop into a proxy war of sorts between the West and Iran, because they're armed, it's believed, by Iran as well as Hezbollah. Hezbollah also in Lebanon, very closely linked with Iran. So this is not a small development.
Yeah, absolutely not. And there's also an aspect here of Grant Shapps in the UK wanting to step up to back their US allies who have been more proactive in the region as some of these ships have been attacked. Guys, thanks so much for now. Emma and Matthew, we will see you again in the next hour. Still to come here on Sky News Breakfast, we'll speak to the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation as junior doctors prepare to walk out this week in what will be the longest strike in the history of the health service. Plus, the campaign that secured the removal of tax on period pads. That's up next.
independent, united kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Welcome back. Let's just bring you up to date again on that breaking news we brought you a few moments ago. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake has struck Japan and there has been a tsunami warning, according to the state broadcaster NHK. And we are going to keep monitoring that situation for you. Various evacuation orders are in place in certain parts of Japan, urging people to get to higher ground. Again, we will bring you more updates on that 7.4 magnitude earthquake that is hitting Japan, alongside some associated tsunami warnings as and when we do get them. Now, on Wednesday here, junior doctors in England will walk out for 6 days in the longest ever strike in NHS history. But NHS leaders are warning the action will put patients at serious risk. I'm joined now by the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, Matthew Taylor. Matthew, thanks so much for joining me and Happy New Year to you. I guess the question here is how much risk this will put patients at, because it's not just 6 days consecutively from a very large number of junior doctors. It's a very busy time for the NHS.
Yes, I think the leaders that I represent across the health service are very concerned about the strike days that start on January the 3rd. We know that cases of flu, of coronavirus, of norovirus have all been rising. So this is always a very busy time of year, but it looks like the population is sicker, which obviously puts more pressure on services. So I think we are going to be skating on the very thinnest of ice over the next few days. There are no national derogations that have been agreed by the VMA. So what we're relying on is that we have an arrangement that if leaders face any particular challenges in terms of what's happening in their own trust, they're able to request the BMA locally to bring junior doctors back into work. And we need that process to be one that is fast. We need the junior doctors to trust leaders when they say that they need that cover, because things are going to be very tough.
So do you see even having that sort of agreement in place as progress or not? I mean, the fact that we're 48 hours away from this starting, is that a pretty depressing place to be?
Well, obviously, progress would be that we weren't having this action at all. And we have seen progress in other areas. You know, last year, 2023, was a year of industrial action for the NHS with nurses and paramedics and consultants. There is now consultation on the consultants deal, a specialist doctors deal. So we do know that these issues can be resolved, but unfortunately, we've not resolved it with the junior doctors. And there will be higher risks over the next few days. We will rely on cooperation from junior doctors, but even with that, there is obviously going to be an impact. There were nearly 100,000 appointments, procedures cancelled in the days of strike leading up to Christmas. We'll see that again, and it will, of course, have a major impact on our capacity to reduce long waiting lists.
You mentioned there some of the deals that have been reached or are nearly over the line with other parts of the health service. Does that create a sense where the junior doctors are somewhat on their own amongst their colleagues or not? Is there still a sense of unity, given that clearly nurses and senior consultants know exactly what the junior doctors are going through? They did so themselves last year, as you mentioned.
Well, I don't think anybody who works in the NHS takes going on strike, lightly. People are aware of the impact that it has on patients, the impact it has on other colleagues. I think, we all understand that junior doctors' pay has fallen in real terms. We understand the immense pressure that junior doctors have to work under. But the reality is that these strikes will make things more difficult, and that's why it's important that, even though the strikes are taking place, and we would rather that they weren't at this time of year, but it's really important that if individual trusts are under pressure, if they're in a situation where their rotas become so stretched that patient safety is endangered, that it's really important that junior doctors are willing to then come back into work to address those issues.
You mentioned the strikes last year being the year of industrial action. Obviously, also we've got some strikes about to kick off the start of this year. Snapshot for me, today versus this time 12 months ago, are you more or less optimistic, pessimistic about the outlook for the NHS this year?
Well, I think, it is important because, the next few days are going to be difficult to look at the positives, and there are positives. We have gone into winter. We did go into winter this year in a better position in a variety of ways. Ambulance response times are better than they were last year. We have fewer people who are in hospital who don't need to be in hospital. And that is happening even though demand is at record levels. So I think we have made progress. I think we do know what we need to do, whether it's meeting winter demands or making inroads into those waiting lists. So, if we don't have industrial action, we can make progress. But industrial action really puts a halt to that. And the fundamental challenge for the health service is always, how do we meet huge demand arriving at the front door of the health service, whether it's in primary care or accident and emergency, at the same time as making some inroads into those waiting lists that had built up before COVID and, of course, massively increased during COVID. Now, that balancing act of meeting demand and making inroads into the backlog is very difficult at the best of times. It becomes almost impossible during industrial action.
Matthew Taylor, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Now, from today, shoppers will no longer pay VAT on period pants, saving around £2 per product. The changes come in following a 2-year campaign by retailers, women's groups and environmentalists. Joining me now on this tampon tax petition, who started the petition in the first place, is the Director of Sex Ed Matters, Laura Coryton. Laura, thanks so much for joining us on this. So just quickly remind us, what was the tampon tax? When did that get abolished and what's happening today?
Yes, so the tampon tax was abolished in 2021, and due to an HMRC administration error, period pants weren't included within that tax bracket. They were basically registered as clothing. So today that product has been reallocated to period products as it should be, and the tax has been completely abolished from 20% to 0%.
And do you think that will help a whole swathe of people?
Definitely. So research shows that 10% of girls miss school every single month because they don't have access to period products. And around about a third of women and girls struggle to afford these products, which are obviously essential, and they're having to use other products or other means instead of period products, like, for example, use socks or newspapers instead, which obviously is a risk to their health. And we go into schools all the time to talk about periods and period confidence. And we hear girls talk about this and how this is impacting them. For example, one student just told me just not that long ago at all that she's trying to get pregnant to avoid having periods because she doesn't have access to the products that she so desperately needs. So yeah, this is a huge problem, and it will really help to make these essential products more accessible.
And do you think that the prices will automatically adjust? I mean, some retailers have been campaigning for this alongside you, which would suggest remove the VAT, you see the price drop 20% straight away.
This is a really important part, and it's the next stage we have to see, which is these prices fall. It is quite frustrating because, as you say, retailers such as M&S, for example, have been calling for this tax reduction, yet they haven't yet reduced the price of their wider period products, despite the fact tampon tax was axed in 2021. So history tells us we haven't seen the reduction in prices. For example, tampon tax equates to £15 million every single year, and we haven't seen that be translated into savings for customers like me and you. But yet we've seen record profits by retailers. So we need to see that reduction in price. And yeah, this is a cause for celebration today, but it's by no means the end of campaigning. We have to see that reduction in tax so it benefits consumers and those people who are struggling to afford these very essential.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and a very happy new year to you. We're going to have a very quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Geraldine has just about gone, but rain and strong winds will return to southern parts later today. It's fairly chilly out of town with a frost and a scattering of showers in the north, but southern parts are mostly fine. The morning looks calmer than recently, with sunny spells for most. Showers in the north will largely fade.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It is Monday, the 1st of January, and a very happy new year to you. You are watching Sky News Breakfast, and we are about to witness people in Las Vegas usher in the new year. Let's take a watch. Very happy new year to everyone in Las Vegas or anyone on Pacific Standard Time, more broadly from Seattle to Los Angeles, joining the rest of us in ushering in 2024. And it is a privilege to have you with us here on Sky News Breakfast this morning. We're going to have to pivot, though, to some less positive breaking news. An update on the developing story we brought you last hour, that Japan has issued a tsunami warning and further earthquake warnings after a series of strong earthquakes hit its north-central region. The Japan Meteorological Agency reported a quake, one of them with a magnitude of 7.4, hitting Ishikawa and nearby prefectures. 5-metre-high waves are believed to have reached the city of Noto, while 1-metre-high waves are also reported near Wajima City on Japan's western coast. Japanese public broadcaster NHK TV has warned torrents of water could reach as high as 16.5 feet and has urged people to flee to high land or the top of a nearby building as quickly as possible. This graphic here from the Japanese Meteorological Agency shows the epicenter, the cross that you can see in the middle. I can't actually see the cross, but I'm sure it'll come soon. The red line represents where there is a tsunami warning. The purple line shows where a major tsunami warning has been issued. Well, Ashna Hiranag is here on set with me just to break down any of the other key details, Ashna, that we are learning of in the last hour or so.
Yeah, there's some quite concerning news reaching us here. Residents within that area, on that belt, as you can see on that map there, have been urged to seek high ground, whether that be top story of buildings, but essentially to evacuate from that coastline. That's after that alert that we've had in the last few seconds, but more pressingly, perhaps that earthquake that they have had in this region, measuring some 7.4, that preliminary magnitude. The Japanese Meteorological Agency reported that quake hitting, as you say, that Ishikawa area in Japan, leading to them having to issue this major tsunami warning for the region and lower level tsunami warnings for those areas either side there on that sort of northern central belt of Japan. And the public broadcaster there warning, as you mentioned, those record levels of water could reach up to 5 metres or 16.5 feet high. And are urging people to seek shelter and evacuate from those areas. But incredibly concerning news as it develops.
It is, and we'll obviously be keeping an eye on this. And the memory, of course, of past tsunamis with huge devastation for Japan and the region will be fresh in people's minds.
Completely. In 2011, is the sort of last major one that Japan had. That was a tsunami that was generated by a 9.0 magnitude earthquake that killed more than 15,000 people and displaced thousands more. And that will be absolutely fresh in people's minds as they wake up to this news or hear this news, as they, of course, have just welcomed the new year in. That major tsunami warning also having a potential knock-on effect for South Korea. Their meteorological agency has warned that their sea levels on the east coast may rise as well if and when a tsunami does hit Japan. But of course, that quake causing a real concern with, we know that water levels and waves have already started to reach up to 2 metres high on that belt there. And so people really being urged to seek shelter and find some sort of sanctuary quite quickly. But, you know, it's that whole worry, isn't it? I think Japan sees something like one tsunami a year. So you would think potentially that people do have those bags packed, do have, you know, those emergency supplies at the ready with blankets and so on. But nothing really quite prepares you for that distress and for that panic.
No, certainly not. Well, we've just had a tweet from the Cabinet Office in Japan saying major tsunami warning. Tsunami waves may be higher than estimated and are expected to hit repeatedly. Keep evacuating to even higher ground wherever possible and do not leave the safe area until the warning is lifted. And Ashton, I guess that tweet coming from the Japanese Cabinet Office sort of sums up the scale of worry at this point as we await further updates.
Yeah, and as you know, mentioning that word repeatedly, that's going to heighten people's worry and panic regarding this. Minds will be turning to the last time that the country faced such a tsunami. It hasn't hit yet, but the expectation is, you know, if you're getting a warning like this, it's going to happen within the next few minutes, in the coming few minutes. But with that warning comes that sort of memory of tsunamis gone by and also what could be to come. But of course, that earthquake that essentially has led to this alert, those were a series of very strong quakes that were felt by residents across Tokyo and in the Kanto area. But the worry is now for the people living on that belt and the Ishikawa region, finding somewhere to go. But as you can see in that map, it's focused on that sort of central northern area, but you have got those yellow kind of warnings for the other periphery as well.
Ashna, thanks so much, and I know you'll stay across it for us and bring us updates as and when we have them. Right, let's take a look at the other stories making headlines this morning. Well, later this week, junior doctors in England will walk out for 6 days in what will be the longest continuous strike in the history of the health service. But NHS leaders are warning the action will put patients at serious risk during what they say is traditionally the busiest week of the year for the NHS. It comes as the number of days lost to strikes in 2023 is expected to set a new record for this millennium, according to figures from the Resolution Foundation. A 68-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of a double murder at a property in Staffordshire. Police were called to a house in Park Lane in Cheadle at 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon, where 2 women were pronounced dead. Staffordshire police are appealing for anyone with information to get in touch. Manchester City footballer Jack Grealish has released a statement after thieves raided his Cheshire home on Wednesday night while his side were playing Everton. The England forward said it had been a traumatic experience for him and his family. Cheshire police say that no arrests have been made and inquiries are ongoing. Energy bills for most people in the UK will rise by around 5% from today after the regulator announced an increase in the energy price cap. It means the average household will pay an extra £94 a year in gas and electricity. Thousands of parents whose children are suffering with poor mental health are reportedly turning to a charity for help. Figures from Young Minds show around 13,000 parents contacted the charity's specialist helpline last year. A further 2,800 mums, dads and carers called the line in need of urgent crisis support. More people than ever before are getting tested for cancer. New analysis by NHS England shows almost 3 million patients were seen in the last 12 months. The figures show the number being tested is up by more than a quarter compared to the same period before the pandemic. From today, women will save up to £2 on period pants as the government scraps VAT after a 2-year campaign. Whilst the so-called tampon tax was dropped from other period products back in 2021, the pants were classed as a garment, meaning they were subject to the 20% VAT rate. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has said the UK will not hesitate to take direct action against Houthi rebels who've been targeting ships in the Red Sea. Those comments coming in today's Telegraph newspaper. Well, Nicole Jensen joins us now from Jerusalem with a live update. And Nicole, the extent to which this was expected or unexpected from Grant Shapps and how it's going down in Jerusalem.
It certainly sounds like the UK is trying to put the pressure on, a serious hardening of the rhetoric, with Grant Shapps saying they would consider taking direct action against the Houthis to protect freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. So certainly wanting to show that the UK is serious about the situation there, and it would change the calculus there. It would put the UK, as well as some of the other countries who are part of this international force, potentially including the US and France, into a offensive position. It's been a dramatic weekend there. We had this Maersk cargo ship attacked twice in 24 hours. The second time it was surrounded by 4 small boats of Houthi fighters. The US military had to intervene to down those boats. The Houthis said that 10 of their fighters were killed. Now, for the Houthi position, they say that as long as the war in Gaza continues, these attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea will continue. And the Houthis say that they are targeting ships with links to Israel. The whole time, though, global shipping is holding its breath. Many of the world's biggest global shipping companies have decided for now to reroute, and instead of taking that shortcut up through the Red Sea past Egypt, they're taking the long, more expensive route down past South Africa, off the tip of the African coast there, which, if it continues for a long time, will inevitably lead to an increase in global commodity prices, which will hit all of us. But for the Houthis, of course, I would say that they're enjoying this sort of global reputation and notoriety that they're getting at the moment, because largely this has been a national movement focused on trying to gain ground in Yemen, on its war with Saudi Arabia for the last 8 years. But its leadership has clearly decided to make it a transnational movement. And from Iran's perspective as well, it'll be getting a lot of attention because it shows that the Houthis are quite a significant player in what Iran calls its axis of resistance against the West.
Nicole, thanks so much. Nicole Johnson there for us in Jerusalem. Now, as Denmark welcomes, in the new year, they too are welcoming the prospect of a 2024 with a new monarch. Queen Margrethe, who's been on the Danish throne since 1972, announced she's to abdicate in 2 weeks' time. In her speech, she mentioned how recent back surgery and her thinking about the future, and saying the time had come to leave the responsibility to the next generation. Well, let's cross to Copenhagen and speak to Marie-Christine Ronde, a royal correspondent at TV2 Denmark. Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning, and Happy New Year to you. The question to me, first of all, is the extent of surprise this took the nation by when it was announced.
It was quite a big surprise and a big shock, I think, for a lot of people, because the Queen has always said that she saw her role as Queen as a life task. And when she's been asked if she was thinking about abdication, she's always said that she will stay until her job was finished. She would stay until she could no longer fulfill her job. And it was a life task for her. So that's what she's always said. And that's why I think it's a big surprise for a lot of Danes. And the people I've talked to, they were very surprised and very shocked about this news that she gave us last night.
Well, on that note, does it lead to anybody to question the whole existence of the monarchy in Denmark? The fact that she has abdicated? Over here, of course, we have a lot of questions around when a king did abdicate back in the 1930s, and the questions that raised at the time, such that, of course, Queen Elizabeth II was steadfast in staying till the very end.
I don't think so at all. The Danish monarchy is very popular. It's the most popular monarchy in the whole of Europe, and the Queen is very popular, and so is her son, Crown Prince Frederik. So I don't think people will question the monarchy or think should it be there or should it not be there. It's a very solid monarchy and people really support it. And they come to wave at her when it's her birthday. They come to occasions when the royal family participate in events. And it's a very strong and a long tradition in Denmark. So I don't think anyone will question, will the monarchy continue? The next king, the coming King Frederik X, is also very popular. People really like him. And he's good at talking to people and he's good at coming out. He has this running event every year where he invites people all over Denmark to come and run with him and his family. And it's a very popular event. Over 90,000 Danes participated in this event last time. So it's a very popular monarchy, it's a very popular royal family, and it's a very popular future king that we're having in 14 days.
Well, that sounds a universally positive transition then. That said, does the new king, the incoming king, have a very tough act to follow?
Absolutely. The king has reigned, or the queen has reigned for 52 years. She's very popular. People really like her. She has modernized the monarchy here in Denmark. It's become very popular and the people really support it. So, of course, he has big shoes to fill, but they are very different. And so he has said in a speech for his mother's jubilee that they are very different. But he is ready to take on the task and to take on the role as a monarch. So, of course, he has big shoes to fill, and you know all about big shoes to fill in Britain. But I think he will do very well because he has a big support in the Danish population.
And just finally, Marie, is the sort of power balance the same in Denmark as it is here? That the government, the elected government, has all the power today, and that it's purely ceremonial, the head of state?
It's the same as in your country. It's the same as in Britain. The Queen signs the new laws, and she has a minor role when the new government is formed. But it is the political power is with the politicians, and the Queen is mostly ceremonial. But she has a role, and it's written in the Constitution. But she has the same role as you know from Great Britain.
Marie Christine Ronda from TV2 Denmark, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Happy New Year.
And a Happy New Year to you as well. Right, it's going to be a big year, political year in the United States, with voters heading to the polls in November for the presidential election. Well, despite facing 91 charges across 4 criminal trials, former President Trump could still sit at the White House once again. Indeed, he's many people's favourites. Now, an ex-federal prosecutor has told Sky News he believes it's highly likely that Mr. Trump will be convicted in at least one of those cases. Our US correspondent, James Matthews, has this report.
The singing you hear is coming from inside this prison. January 6 prisoners behind bars in Washington, D.C. Every night around 9 p.m. they sing their national anthem, relayed by phone to supporters who gather outside.
Stephen Cappuccio, Matthew Caskell, Donald Chilcote.
They recite a January the 6th prisoner
Richard
list.
Harris, Joshua Haynes,
Hero.
Isaiah Farnsworth,
Hero.
In 2024, will the name Donald Trump be added?
Hello, Frank.
Prosecutors say he inspired Capitol rioters.
My name's James Matthews. I'm from Sky News in the UK.
We put that to one. Frank Justino.
I was not inspired by anybody to do any sort of conviction. I mean, the way I see it, I never really committed a crime. A lot of people didn't commit any crimes. They were just there to peacefully protest.
You'll probably see the jury...
The test of criminality lies in Trump's courtroom calendar. He faces 4 criminal trials.
91 felony charges. I think all of these cases, he faces real legal jeopardy.
We asked former prosecutor Glenn Kirshner to talk us through the Trump trials ahead.
What that will do is it will probably...
The 4th of March is marked down as the start date for his January 6th trial.
We fight like hell.
He's accused of efforts to overturn the result of the 2020 election, leading to riots at the Capitol.
I think the odds of a conviction are extremely high. I believe that the testimony we will see will come from a chorus of Republican voices. It makes it much more difficult for a defendant, for Donald Trump, for a fellow Republican to say they're all out to get me. Interestingly, the one in New York is set for trial.
After March the 4th, March the 25th is penciled in for the New York State trial on hush money payments to a former porn star and alleged false accounting.
Will you come speak to us, President Trump?
The next due date in court is for the alleged mishandling of classified documents at his Florida home. That's on the 20th of May.
Mr. Trump, why were you holding nuclear secrets, sir?
Charging Donald J. Trump with felony violations of our national security laws.
In the state of Georgia, the prosecution has asked for an August the 5th trial date on charges of trying to overturn the 2020 election result.
Arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results.
They won't all take place before Election Day on November the 5th, but the January 6th trial should.
Nobody knows if he will go to jail, but I believe the judge, I believe the prosecution team, as headed up by Jack Smith, understand that if you don't punish that dramatic wrongdoing, those democracy-busting crimes, then you're giving the next aspiring dictator a green light to do it all over again.
Donald Trump's court diary will intersect sharply with the campaign trail. The trial of his alleged involvement in riots over there will begin in the courtroom here the day before Super Tuesday, a big voting day in terms of the selection of presidential candidates. Then there's a Republican convention in July. The party may be faced with the choice of a convicted criminal as their candidate for the White House.
So Father, we ask that you and love...
Prison and the prospect of conviction complicate the politics for Donald Trump. A recent poll showed that in key battleground states, if he's convicted, 6% of voters would switch their vote to Joe Biden. It could be enough to swing the election. How the politics play out will be a concern for the former president, but it won't be the only one. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
James Matthews there for us. We are going to bring you now an update on the situation in Japan. We do have some live pictures. As you can see, they're not the best pictures in the world. These are coming from Namerikawa in the Toyama prefecture. As we mentioned earlier, Japan has issued tsunami alerts after a series of strong quakes in the Sea of Japan. And the Japanese Meteorological Agency reported quakes off the coast of Ishikawa and nearby prefectures shortly after 4 p.m. local time. One of them had a preliminary magnitude of 7.6. It's issued a major tsunami warning for Ishikawa and a lower-level tsunami warning for various areas on the rest of the western coast of the island of Honshu. You can see there the key parts in purple right in the middle, and then in red where the more serious warnings are highlighted there. Now, the Japanese Prime Minister, Kishida, has called on local residents to evacuate immediately following the earthquake. It looks like he's speaking right now because various flashes are coming through. He's instructed the government to provide clear guidance on the earthquake and the tsunami, as well as to check the extent of damages. And he's also instructed the government to do everything possible to ensure the safety of people's lives. And ongoing warnings in place for earthquakes and for tsunamis, as reported from that 7.6 initial reading in the Ishikawa region for an earthquake that's now likely to cause a tsunami. We'll give you more on that when we do have it. Now, back to news here. And while people in the UK gathered in pubs, clubs and living rooms celebrating the new year with family and friends, there were many in the emergency services who worked through the night, keeping the nation safe. Well, joining me now is Rhiannon, a nurse who's worked over the Christmas and New Year period and joins me this morning. A very happy New Year to you, Rhiannon, and thanks so much, A, for joining us, but more importantly, for working through these times when everyone else is celebrating or at home with family.
Yeah, I mean, it's nursing's a 365 days a year, 24-hour service. And there's, nurses wouldn't be anywhere else. That's who we are. That's what we do.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask the scale to which you see it as an annoyance when you have to work these particular shifts or part of the job. It doesn't reduce the scale of gratitude I think people have for it. But is it something you kind of feel like a duty to do, or is it something that you dread every year?
I mean, I've worked in the NHS a long time, and I work with an amazing team who don't feel like that. They're here and they're here to support our patients. Like I've just said, we're with them 24 hours a day, and it's a very unique service in that way. Of course, everybody misses their family. We have our own families, we have our own friends that we want to see, but we make arrangements that work around that so that we can be here with our patients, because they are people too, they are humans too, and we want to be there to support them in health. We work from the cradle to the grave. That's who nurses are. That's who we are. That's our profession.
Yeah, well, again, thank you for that. It's an amazing perspective to have and service to deliver. What's the night been like? Is New Year's Eve regularly quite busy? Was it busy this year overnight?
Across the NHS, it's always busy as New Year's Eve for obvious reasons. But then, we've got everything that's been running across the NHS over at least the last 10 years, particularly marked over the last year. So we've got, waiting times, queuing out of ED doors. We've got backlogs of beds. We've got lack of movement into social care. So we've got patients that are waiting in NHS beds longer than they need to. So we're still battling with that every day. And as a nursing profession, obviously, we're still battling with really short staffing levels that does put our patients at risk.
Well, I mean, on that note, as you mentioned, it was it's been a challenging period on pretty much any time frame that we look at, but particularly over the last year with lots of strikes. I don't know if you're willing to address this at all, but were you someone that did strike, and are you pleased that's behind you, or is that not something you particularly want to address?
No, I am a striking nurse, for want of a better term. We've been termed as striking nurses. It's a very, very big emotional roller coaster for any nurse to go on strike. I talk about a 365-day service. What we're facing at the moment is shifts where, we can be looking at, one nurse can be looking after up to 15 to 20 patients at a time, and it's unsafe. I don't ever want to go out on strike again, but if it means fighting for my patients, then myself and my colleagues would go back out on strike again.
Well, Rhiannon, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it, and a Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, thank you.
Rhiannon there, a nurse following a long shift overnight. Right, time to get the sport now with James. And James, a bit more Premier League action still to come, but the darts, perhaps, the pick of the action.
Yeah, it's darts season. Darts are the pick of the action. And a 16-year-old Luke Littler is back in action. So that's what we've got to look forward to today. He's in quarter-final action at Alexandra Palace this afternoon. And in the sport, we'll also show you some goals from yesterday afternoon's Premier League action.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Take us back to June the 7th, ahead of the game, because you'd had such an amazing run to the final. Were you quietly confident?
I was, and I remember coming in and saying, how did the other semi-final go? And they said at the moment Baal's beating Fiorentina. I went, oh good, I think we might have a better chance against Baal than Fiorentina. And next time we come out, they said Fiorentina have won the game. I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be much tougher. So I went into it knowing that, our record in Europe had been pretty good, we'd done okay, but this was probably going to be one of our biggest tests. And obviously Fiorentina, I had played against them before with Everton, and they had knocked me out in penalty kicks in the quarter-final of the Europa League. So Fiorentina, maybe, I was worried that maybe, is it one of these bogey teams I've got?
When Said Benrahma scored the penalty though, what was going through your mind at that point? Did you start to believe this could be your night?
I always believed that we had a good chance of winning the game. When Said went up to take the penalty kick, he's been so good with them, I felt confident that we would get it. But you know, I never knew how the game was going to go after that, and obviously they got back into it as well. I was more disappointed that we'd sort of lost a goal, and I thought in the end it wasn't a great goal to give away. So we had to go and do it again, and I'm thinking to myself, look, this is probably going to go to penalty kicks or extra time, and how's this going to go? I just felt that the game was going to be tight. I didn't think there was going to be an awful lot between the teams. There was going to be small margins quite often, which there is.
That moment when Jarrod Bowen gets that goal, when he's going for the goal, it must have taken forever to almost go. What was
I
going
can still
through your head
remember the feeling of that. I was walking down as if to say, come on. And Jarrod was in good form, scoring form, and I thought, go on, he's someone who wants to score. It's a great moment, it really was, and look, one I'll remember greatly as a manager. For West Ham as a football club, brilliant moment, because, let's be fair, I don't think West Ham have been round too many cup finals, and then to get one in Europe, you know, even more special, and more importantly to go and win it.
There's a lovely moment as well when you put that medal around your dad's neck. What did he say to you?
You know, my dad comes to games, he's been a great support, went to most of the games in Europe. You know, my brother took him, and it was great that he got to see them at his age he is. And it was a bit like, you know, it seemed that everybody was down at the pitch, and I saw my dad, so I just said, come down, I'll say hello, because I was more worried that maybe I didn't get to see him after the game, or just the whole thing get caught up, we didn't get a chance. So I came down and I put the medal around his neck, and it seemed to hit a note with quite a lot of people.
Oh, it did. And for you personally, I think that game was your 1097th. This was a major trophy for you. Was there a part of you that thought, I'm never going to experience that in this career?
Well, look, when you come to West Ham and you say, I'm going to win a European trophy, I think supporters of other football clubs would have probably laughed at that. But we have done, and we've gone on and done it. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to come and have some effect at West Ham. But when we took over 3-4 years ago, we were relegation, probably in relegation battle. Now we're a team who's getting talked about.
Should we talk about the dancing?
Yeah, you can talk about the dancing.
No regrets. I mean, it was another
absolutely.
Lovely moment.
None, and if you give me a chance to do it again, I'll be the first one to try that dancing stuff out again.
It was fabulous. When you got back here, you'd have been, I guess you came back to the club. Was that a real hero's welcome?
When we came back, we were able with an open top bus.
Sure.
It was incredible. It's a beautiful night, everybody was out. But it got a chance, we brought all the people, all the staff, everybody involved at the club. And I think since I come back, probably one of the biggest things I've been more impressed with is the people who work at the club.
And in terms of that parade, was that the moment where you it sunk into you what it meant to the local community, for West Ham to have won in Europe?
It sunk into me as well, the feeling what it must feel for maybe Pep or Josie or Sir Alex.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
James, thanks so much there for the sport. Time for a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Geraldine has just about gone, but rain and strong winds will return to southern parts later today. It's fairly chilly out of town with a frost and a scattering of showers in the north. But southern parts are mostly fine. The morning looks calmer than recently, with sunny spells for most. Showers in the north will largely fade, but South Wales, southwest England and the south of Ireland will cloud over, with outbreaks of rain taking over by midday. It'll be a bit milder than yesterday. Northern Ireland, Wales and southern England will turn wet and windy later, while northern England and Scotland will be fine, apart from the odd shower. Rain through southern parts will mostly clear into central Scotland overnight, with a few showers following, but southern England will stay wet. Expect a spell of snow on northern hills. It'll be windy in the south with coastal gales for a time. That's your weather.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News at breakfast, and still to come, we'll have more on the developing situation in Japan as people are told to evacuate following a major tsunami warning.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
This is a 4-lane dual carriageway, completely shut off. Some things are being allowed in, but actually the only thing we've seen coming out is an ambulance. The message from China is clear. This is a modernised military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed. Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to. By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left, to the left.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place, and it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
The world is watching what's happening here.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. We want to bring you more on the developing story that Japan has issued a tsunami warning and further earthquake warnings after a series of strong earthquakes hit its north-central region. Well, just to recap for you, the Japanese Meteorological Agency reported a quake, one of them with a magnitude of 7.4, hitting Ishikawa and nearby prefectures. 5-metre-high waves are believed to have reached the city of Noto, while 1-metre-high waves are also reported near Wajima City on Japan's western coast. Japanese public broadcaster NHK TV has warned torrents of water could reach as high as 16.5 feet and has urged people to flee to high land or to the top of a nearby building as quickly as possible. Well, in the last few minutes, Japan's Prime Minister has urged local residents to evacuate immediately. This graphic is from the Japanese Meteorological Agency, and the cross, which is quite hard to see in there, but represents the epicenter. The red line represents where there is a tsunami warning in place. The purple line right there in the middle of the red line shows where a major tsunami warning has been issued. And in the last hour, Japan's Cabinet Office has issued a statement saying major tsunami warning. Tsunami waves may be higher than estimated and are expected to hit repeatedly. Keep evacuating to even higher ground wherever possible and do not leave the safe area until the warning is lifted. Well, Ashna is here on set with me to bring us more. We also have a few live pictures which will also bring you. And Ashna, what more do we know at this point?
Well, we know that in the last few moments there have been a series of multiple earthquake alerts issued for that particular region. One has already been felt by residents across Tokyo and in the Kanto area. The meteorological agency, which have issued this map to the wider public and residents there, reported that a quake hit that area, the Ishikawa area, and nearby areas, one of them, as you say, measuring 7.4 on the Richter scale. There are warnings, major warnings in place for the entire, as you can see, of that northwestern coast and the island of Honshu. The water, you know, we're talking about waves here that could hit repeatedly, say, the Japanese Cabinet Office. The Japanese public broadcaster, NHK TV, warning that some of those waves could reach as high as 5 metres. The broadcaster is also reporting that smaller tsunami waves have already started reaching the coastline, and they are informing the public to flee to high land, to nearby buildings, to try and reach some sort of height to get away from the coastline, most importantly. And Reuters also are reporting that the chief cabinet secretary of the Japanese government, Yoshimasa Hayashi, has done an emergency press conference and has warned residents to prepare for further quakes that may lead in turn to further tsunami warnings. And the Prime Minister, PM Kishida, also addressing the press and the public today, calling on people to evacuate and saying that he is instructing his government to use all the resources that they have to try and help people.
And Ash, I just want to bring up some pictures that we do now have of the moment that the quake first hit. These are from some security cameras, obviously in the region when the quake came in, and unsurprisingly showing that moment of the shock. And Ash, I guess also fresh, of course, on people's minds here and more notably there will be the recent experience of 2011.
Yeah, Japan is a country that's extremely prone to this sort of activity, particularly earthquakes. That March event, 2011 event, as you mentioned, that hit the northeastern of the country. That was a tsunami generated by a 9.0 magnitude earthquake that killed more than 15,000 people and displaced thousands of people. And that major quake and the tsunami, those will remember at the time, caused huge meltdowns in nuclear plants. Interestingly, the area in which this alert has been given for also includes a nuclear plant, and its operator, Tokyo's Electric Power Corporation or company, said it was checking for problems, though they were keen to stress there are no immediate reports of any irregularities at this stage.
And Asha, just remind us again of the locations that we're talking about. We've got this map behind us, and the red cross is actually quite hard to see. That's the epicenter of what the 7.4 magnitude part of this, and then associated tsunami warnings are centred around that red cross, which is, for those that can't quite see from our picture, the red cross is just there on the edge of the purple line, which is where major tsunami warnings have been issued. The red line either side of that is where the tsunami warnings have been issued.
Yeah, this map was issued in the last sort of half an hour or so by the agency that's forecasting a lot of these predictions. And just to break down the key for people who are looking at this close-up version of this map, you mentioned there that red cross, that's the epicenter of that earthquake which has struck and where the tsunami warning now is. The purple line, for people at home watching, that is the major tsunami warning area. So that's just on the northeastern coast there. We're sort of talking about the Ishikawa region. But it's also, as we can see, the nearby areas too affected. The red line, that's showing a tsunami warning, and the yellow line is an advisory warning. But further to the north of the country, there's also a bit of a blue line that shows a tsunami forecast. So it could well be, you know, some of that pressure, some of the movements may well cause issues for other parts of the country too. So really the evacuation is for those that are in that red area, but also for the yellow area too. And that's incorporating a vast area for people. And this is the moment that you brought to viewers a few moments ago, showing that initial quake. And since that moment, there have been a number of other alerts. Most recent quake measuring something like 5.2. And really any further impact, of course, does increase the amount of damage that's already being done to some of those cities.
And again, as we see from the time code on that moment, happening just after 4 p.m. local time in Japan on, of course, this New Year's Day, just hours after the nation celebrated ushering in 2024. And Ashna, just remind us some of the comments that we've heard so far from the Japanese government and the warnings that they've been issuing to their people.
Yes, so the Reuters news agency have attended a press conference which has been given by the Chief Cabinet Secretary, who is acting as the Prime Minister's spokesperson today. It's Yoshimasa Hayashi. That was him acting as the spokesperson the last few minutes. This is also showing some of the impact of the quake. Just having a quick look at some of the pictures that are coming out of some of the cities that are affected. It looks as though pavements have been completely uprooted. You've got a lot of rubble on the ground already. Not so much impact on sort of big flats and big buildings as such, but certainly there are cracks in the roads, just giving you an idea of what that picture might be looking like over there. And that would be the aftermath of this quake hitting the country. So the Cabinet Secretary there sort of encouraging people to use that emergency protocol to evacuate as quickly as they can. And he has told residents to prepare for possible further quakes. The Prime Minister also speaking this morning or during the day over there, as you say, Prime Minister Kishida has called on people to evacuate and to heed advice. He is also instructing his government to use all resources they have to their hand to try and cope with the situation that's unfolding before their eyes.
Well, Ashna, thank you very much for that for now. And just as a reminder that a 7.4 magnitude earthquake has been recorded in the Ishikawa area of Japan, and that has led to tsunami warnings in places and major tsunami warnings in other places. And so far, waves of up to 5 metres have been reported, though thankfully not in a widespread fashion yet. It's something we're going to continue to monitor. Indeed, we're going to take a short break here on Sky News, and we will be joined by an expert guest in this area on the other side of the break. And we'll continue to bring you all of the developments as we have them. We'll be right back.
Independent United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Welcome back, and let's go straight to our developing top story this morning. Japan has issued a tsunami warning and further earthquake warnings after a series of strong earthquakes hit its north-central region. This graphic from the Japan Meteorological Agency shows the epicenter with a small red cross, as you can see, almost right in the middle of that diagram. The red line around that represents a tsunami warning being in place. The purple line represents a major tsunami warning being in place. Let's bring in Dr. John Nilsson Wright, Senior Lecturer in Japanese Politics at the University of Cambridge. Thanks so much for joining me, Dr. Nilsson Wright. Just talk us through your assessment so far of the likely scale of this, with your knowledge of how and when Japan decides to kick in these warnings.
I think we should take this very, very seriously. Obviously, the government has made it very clear with its evacuation order that it's very concerned. I think the expectation, some have said that there's a possibility of a tsunami of 5 meters or potentially even higher, hitting part of that northwest coast of Japan. This is obviously hard to gauge before the tsunami hits. But I think in terms of the response of the government, the number of earthquakes we've seen, the intensity of the earthquake, and the expectation that the need for a mass evacuation, it's clear to me that the government sees this as potentially a disaster, potentially of huge consequences for that part of the country.
And maybe we'll briefly remember 2011 in a moment, but since then, have there been evacuation warnings, Cabinet Office spokespersons, Prime Minister speaking, evacuation being the only word strapped across the state broadcasters' lower third? Have you seen anything like that since 2011, or is this a sort of err on the side of caution type approach that has happened in the last decade?
This seems to me, I think, of a different order of magnitude from what we've seen since 3/11, the last time we had that of course devastating earthquake and tsunami. One thing, of course, that we're also seeing being part of the news broadcasts is concern about the impact on particularly nuclear power stations. And so far, the good news is that there's no evidence to suggest that any of those nuclear power stations in that vicinity have been affected. But there's no doubt that the government is taking this very, very seriously indeed.
And in terms of 3/11, as you referred to it, Fukushima was a central part, how it's often referred to here. But of course, the nuclear power plant wasn't the start of the issue. It was sort of the culmination of the problem. Just remind viewers what happened then and how that will no doubt be very much in people's minds in Japan as these warnings flash across their screens.
Well, I mean, in the case of 3/11 and the Fukushima nuclear power plant, it was the impact of the tsunami as it hit the nuclear power plant and the resulting meltdown and the release of radiation that was, of course, the most dramatic and impactful aspect of that particular disaster. And of course, it was the tsunami itself, which of course had devastating consequences for thousands of Japanese citizens. And that's, I think, why we're seeing this abundance of caution at this stage. Now, hopefully, the worst predictions will not be realized, but the government needs, of course, in a country which is so vulnerable to seismic effects of this nature, to take every possible precaution.
Well, I was going to ask as well, have the country's automatic protocols that I guess we're seeing kicking into action been dramatically improved and extended since 2011, such that it gives some hope that the impact will be minimised?
That's hard to say. Well, obviously, one would hope that in the wake of the last disaster, that there will have been a serious effort to improve the response rate on the part of the government as best as is possible in the event of these sorts of catastrophes. Having said that, I think what we're seeing at the moment is a period of uncertainty and precautions. The fact that we've had a response at the level of the government and the Chief Cabinet Secretary, I think, is a measure of just how seriously they are preparing and trying to anticipate what might happen. We've seen the suspension of some transportation. Some of the train lines have automatically suspended their trains, precisely in order to guard against these events. And here, as we see on the screen at the moment, pictures of evacuations taking place. So we will have to wait and see what happens. But understandably, the government wants to put in place every possible precaution to ensure that people remain as safe as possible.
And Dr. Nilsson, right, just stick around for a moment, if you may. I just want to bring in Ashna Hiranag, who's here with me on set and been monitoring all the headlines that have been crossing. And Ashna, any further developments, or what broader summary can you bring us at this moment?
Well, you know, the professor is right. Dr. Nilsson, right as he touches upon the fact that the Japanese government is taking this incredibly seriously, I think speaks volumes in a sense. We know that the chief cabinet secretary has been speaking to reporters on the ground in what has been a sort of an emergency press conference. And he has said, to quote him, as Reuters are reporting, "Every minute counts, please evacuate to a safe area immediately." And that immediacy, that the kind of strength of warning there being reiterated to people who are in that specific area, which not only is near this quake, but also in those coastal areas as well. And as we see this footage now coming into a sort of minute-by-minute breakdown of some of what the impact might be, that is a real concern for people there. We know that this preliminary reading of this earthquake looks to be something like 7.4. And since that earthquake hit about 4 p.m. Japanese time, there have been a number of aftershocks, which we know are being felt by residents across Tokyo, but also in that specific Kanto area. The pictures that are coming out of the region predominantly are from Ishikawa and its neighbouring areas. So we know that, you know, as things develop, people are being urged to evacuate imminently.
Just developing on that point as well, Russia has just declared a tsunami warning in its far eastern cities, Vladivostok and Nakhodka TASS. The mayors of those cities have declared. So clearly far-reaching consequences of this. Our thanks to Dr. John Nilsson-Wright for joining us. We're going to continue our developing coverage of the situation in Japan following that major tsunami warning. We'll be right back after just a couple of minutes. A very good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock on Monday, the 1st of January. This is Sky News Breakfast. We start with breaking news. Japan has issued a tsunami warning and further earthquake warnings after a series of strong earthquakes hit its north-central region. This is the moment one of the quakes hit Japan. Office workers can be seen clinging to desks and computer monitors as the building shakes around them. Well, the Japan Meteorological Agency reported a quake, one of them with a magnitude of 7.4, hitting Ishikawa and nearby prefectures. 5-metre-high waves are believed to have reached the city of Noto, while 1-metre-high waves are also reported near Wajima City on Japan's western coast. Japanese public broadcaster NHK TV has warned torrents of water could reach as high as 16.5 feet and has urged people to flee to high land or the top of a nearby building as quickly as possible. In the last few moments, Japan's Prime Minister Kishida has urged local residents to evacuate immediately. Well, this graphic is from the Japanese Meteorological Agency. The cross represents the epicenter. We will zoom in on it so you can see it more clearly. The red cross is in the middle of the purple line, but the red line, which you can see clearly, represents where there's a tsunami warning in place. The purple line shows where there is a major tsunami warning in place, and the purple is right in the middle of the red there, and the red cross, the epicenter, is in the middle of the purple. We'll zoom in just a moment for you. Well, in the last hour, Japan's Cabinet Office has issued a statement. It says tsunami waves may be higher than estimated and are expected to hit repeatedly. Keep evacuating to even higher ground wherever possible and do not leave the safe area until the warning has lifted. Well, with me here on set is Ashna Hurinak, who's been covering this for us since we got the news about an hour or so ago, just after 4 p.m. local time in Japan. And Ashna, what is the latest?
Well, it's about 6 o'clock roughly now in Japan. So we know they've been battling this for some 2 hours or so. After that initial earthquake that, as you say, measured some 7.4 on the Richter scale, affecting that Ishikawa area, we know there have been several aftershocks following that. The public broadcaster in Japan, NHK TV, which some of those pictures are from, have been warning that some of the torrents of water are expected to reach some 5 metres high. They have reinforced that urgent warning to people to flee to high land, to the top of nearby buildings as quickly as possible. That is following that earthquake that viewers can see on their screen. The Prime Minister has reiterated to reporters on the ground today. The government spokesperson, first of all, has said every minute counts. Please evacuate to a safe area immediately. And Prime Minister Kishida has reinforced that urgent warning and said it's critical for people to get away. And this is some of what people are experiencing. Over in Wajima City, some pictures coming out from there show huge cracks in the road. We've seen sort of rubble and pavements uprooted, such as the intensity and the strength of that earthquake. And really now the focus is on waiting for what people are expecting to be a kind of quite significant tsunami that could target that sort of northwestern coast of the island of Honshu.
Ashna, stick with me here on set. I want to bring in Dr. John Nilsson-Wright, Senior Lecturer in Japanese Politics at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Nilsson-Wright, thanks again for rejoining us. And if you could just sum up once again for us your assessment of the scale of warnings we're seeing from the government, from the state broadcaster, and what it implies about the severity, about what Japan might be facing or about to face.
I mean, I think the key thing is this order to evacuate immediately and the extent of the area covered by this, which is pretty much the entire northwest coast of Japan. Those areas that were highlighted, of course, in your map, designating, I think, where the earthquake is likely to have the most immediate impact. But to have the Prime Minister's office make this undeclared, unambiguous warning, I think is a reflection of just how seriously the government takes this. They have to prepare for the worst case eventuality. If we're talking about waves of 5 meters or potentially higher, it doesn't take much imagination to realize the impact that this will have on those coastal communities. And of course, all of this underscored by the very powerful memory of the last devastating earthquake, 3/11 as it's known, means that the government, I think, has to take this extremely seriously. It's not only, of course, the impact of the tsunami, but, of course, the uncertainty surrounding the earthquakes, which are continuing, it seems to me, from the reports we've heard so far, to add to the unpredictability in a country which, of course, is long used to this sort of seismic activity, but perhaps not on this scale, at least in recent years.
And stick with us, Dr. Nilsson, right? Ashton, we've also had some comments from Korea and Russia as well, which shows the far-reaching scale of this.
Yeah, to start with South Korea, first of all, the meteorological agency over there warning their sea level on the east coast may rise, warning that waves of up to 3 foot high too could affect the coastal regions in North Korea, and also Russia, who have only just recently, in the last few minutes, issued a tsunami warning there, giving you a sense of that scale of how concerned people are within those meteorological agencies. It is not just those that sort of vast region of Japan affected, but it looks as though this could have more wider region consequences for international communities too. And as the professor says, the fact you have got this unambiguous, urgent warning from officials in Japan poses quite distressing news for people who, of course, have been celebrating New Year's Day today. And there could not possibly be a worse time for this to happen.
Indeed, this first strike of the earthquake hitting just after 4 p.m. local time. It's just after 6 p.m. local time now in Japan. And we're just seeing, according to Reuters, that Japan's issued another earthquake warning for the Ishikawa prefecture. And Dr. Nilsson, right, will, of course, be focused on the broad impact, the immediate impact of earthquakes and tsunamis if they hit on people, but the sort of secondary impact that people will be focusing on, for obvious reasons, you mentioned 3/11, March 2011, is on any nuclear power stations. We haven't seen negative reports on that note as of yet, thankfully, but remind us what happened in 2011 and the scale of focus that will continue in that area, and I guess the long-term impacts of that. Is Japan still predominantly nuclear-powered, or has it been much reduced since 2011?
Well, I mean, the fact that so many nuclear power stations were closed as a result of the last disaster, in a way, makes it much less of an immediate critical threat in terms of the vulnerabilities of those nuclear power plants. But there are some that are active. There are, I think, from what we've seen in news reports, no indications that any plants have been directly affected so far. Of course, back in 3/11, in March 2011, the impact on the Fukushima nuclear power plants, 3 reactors that effectively shut down as a result of, were impacted by the tsunami, releasing radiation in the process. That's, of course, the worst case scenario that the government will be desperate to avoid. But in the immediate aftermath of this news, and it's still unfolding, we still don't know what the likely impact is going to be. They have to prepare for the impact of an enormous set of tidal waves, 5 meters in the concentrated center of that part of the northwest of the Japanese coastline, but also reports that we might have waves of 3 meters or higher in other parts of the coastline. I think you don't have to, I mean, when you look at the scale of this in terms of the map, the impact in terms of moving a large number of people inland very, very rapidly, given the fears that the government has, it's a huge logistical challenge. The one lesson I think that they will have taken away from the last earthquake is the importance of speed and persuading people to move quickly. We have to wait and see what happens.
Indeed. And Ashton, why don't we just recap? We've been showing the map again and just recap for people exactly what we're looking at there, where the epicenter was, what hit and what those different colours mean.
This is a map that was issued by the Japanese Meteorological Agency that is being updated all the time. For people at home that might be able to see on their screens now, this map, the purple line, which is in the centre of that northeastern sort of coastline or northern coastline, right sort of in the centre of the country, that is the major tsunami warning area. And there is a a red X within that purple area. That shows the epicenter of that 7.4 earthquake, which hit some 2 hours ago. The red line that creeps up in either direction on that coastline is where a tsunami warning has been issued. Again, the purple one, a major tsunami warning. The yellow line that stretches, again, further both north and south along the country's coastline is an advisory warning. But the evacuation order is in place for people who sit on the red line. But that advisory warning, if you're waking up or sort of having your dinner in Japan and seeing that yellow advisory warning, the advice very much is to pack your bags regardless.
I just want to bring in Dr. Nilsson right on this. As we zoomed into that image, it's not clearly marked. For those of us that aren't Japanese experts like you, what are the major coastal cities that you're particularly focused on in that purple area and indeed the red area as well?
Well, it's the prefectures of Ishikawa in the very centre, Toyama, Niigata. All of these prefectures are not heavily populated by comparison to the areas around Tokyo. So in that sense, I suppose one can say that the impact is potentially ameliorated slightly, but we're still talking about hundreds of thousands of people who will have to be moved in very short order. I think why we see this unfolding, what we recognise, I think, again, looking at the map, is how much of the countryside, in fact, the entire coastal area of those 4 principal islands of Japan, are being affected. And it's going to be an enormous logistical challenge for the government to move people quickly. And they are doing what they need to do in order to be as cautious as possible. But there's no doubt that the impact of this is going to be huge. And that's why we're seeing such deliberation and deliberateness on the part of the government in making these very unambiguous warnings.
Well, I just want to bring you some pictures of a press conference that has just begun, being taken by the Japanese Meteorological Agency. We don't, in fact, have a live translation for this yet, but we're working on that. We should have it for you very soon, so we can bring you some of the key points from it. But we can tell you that in the last 10 minutes, as I mentioned a little while ago, that Japan has issued another earthquake warning to Ishikawa, Niigata, Nagano and Toyama prefectures. So more is expected to come, alas. We will try and bring you the details of that press conference as soon as we can, update you on the translation. In the meantime, Ashna, you've been monitoring everything that's come out, and we have had also some comments both from the Cabinet Office and from the Prime Minister himself of Japan.
Yeah, and you mentioned it there that this press conference by the Weather Agency is happening as we speak. It is likely they've issued some sort of trails to the media ahead of what they might say. Even though that this is a country that's used to seismic activity, this feels particularly unusual. It feels different, and given the urgency of the warnings and how quickly they've come out, it feels significant and that those warnings should be heeded and are being heeded by residents who are being very quick to evacuate. Clear that the government is taking this incredibly seriously, speed being of utmost importance, it seems, given that we have had, very quickly after this earthquake, the Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, coming out, calling on people to heed that advice to evacuate. He's saying that it is critical for people to get away. An emergency press conference was held by the Chief Cabinet Secretary for the government. And to quote him, Yoshimasa Hayashi, he said, "Every minute counts. Please evacuate to a safe area immediately," speaking directly to the people in that Ishikawa region, which, as we understand it, is quite a concentrated area. As the professor mentioned, it may not be as densely populated as other parts of the country, but you're still talking about a mass evacuation of people as quickly as possible.
We just mentioned one of the headlines coming from this press conference being held by the Japan Meteorological Agency, saying that we need to be vigilant for earthquakes with seismic intensity of a 7 for about a week, especially in the next 2 to 3 days. So just warning of the broad threat of secondary strikes in the next few days. And Dr. John Nilsson Wright, who's with us from the University of Cambridge, Just remind our viewers again, if you will, of the scale of these warnings we're seeing, either from this agency or from the government itself, and what that implies to you as someone who follows Japan so closely as to the potential scale of what the country is facing right now.
Well, I mean, the government is taking this with the utmost seriousness. They're making it very clear by, of course, with this remarkable announcement that an evacuation, a mass evacuation, has to be carried out swiftly and immediately. That's, I think, a reflection with, of course, that advice coming from the very top of government, from the Prime Minister's office, from the Chief Cabinet Secretary, using the national broadcaster to reinforce that message, using online information and online reports to highlight to the Japanese public on their mobile phones the scale of this disaster as it unfolds. It is, I think, pretty much unprecedented since the last major earthquake to see this level of government coordination and deliberation in terms of making this statement very clearly to their own citizens. And as your correspondent was highlighting, the area around Toyama Prefecture and the peninsula, which is at the center of this warning, is heavily populated. And I think there needs to be every effort now to move people very, very quickly, because there's a great deal of unpredictability. But if we're talking about waves in the order of 5 meters in that purple area, and 3 meters or higher in the red and yellow areas, then of course the government has no choice but to take every possible measure at this stage to try and guard against the worst case scenario.
Just mentioned an update from the ongoing press conference with the Japanese Meteorological Agency. They're saying a tsunami of higher than 1.2 meters was observed in Noto in the Ishikawa Prefecture. We'll continue to monitor any translations coming out of that press conference. Dr. Nielsen-Wright, just before we take a quick break, you mentioned there the worst sets of government warnings around this and therefore creating a fear that things are going to be worse than they have been so far. Since the Fukushima, as we often refer to it, issue that stemmed from an earthquake and a tsunami in March 2011, presumably those since then, even if it's the worst since then, the kind of protections, the preparedness and the responses have been improved significantly. Is that fair to say? In fact, are we seeing a bit of that kick into action now?
I think so. I think what we're seeing is a recognition of the lessons of history and the realization that the most important lesson that came out of the last disaster is the need for a quick and speedy response and to be unambiguous in highlighting the dangers. So the government is doing what it can do and what it should do. But of course, it remains a moving situation, unpredictable in terms of the scale of the tsunamis that might hit the coastline of Japan. We do not know, however, at this stage, whether they will be as serious as the government seems to suggest that they may be. And that's why the government, of course, is taking every possible precaution.
OK, great stuff. Dr. Nielsen-Wright, thank you for now. Do please stick with us. Ashton Hurianag still here with me on set. But we're going to take a very quick break and we'll have more on this developing story when we come back.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing. My most memorable story was covering the extreme zero COVID restrictions.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
This is a 4-lane dual carriageway, completely shut off. Some things are being allowed in, but actually the only thing we've seen coming out is an ambulance. The message from China is clear. This is a modernized military, absolutely able to fight an international war if needed. Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey.
By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets.
To the left.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
There are people who are afraid.
On the streets of Xinjiang, there is still a tension. Heavy police, a sense they're always watching.
It's really an incredible eeriness to this place, and it just is completely abandoned. The Chinese housing market, for so long a driver of growth, is now a real liability. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's actually hard to describe the cold here. It's so intense. It literally takes your breath away.
I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling.
The world is watching what's happening here.
Welcome back, and more on our developing top story this morning. Japan has issued a tsunami warning and further earthquake warnings after a series of strong earthquakes hit its north-central region. The Japan Meteorological Agency reported a quake, one of them with a magnitude of 7.4, hitting Ishikawa and nearby prefectures. Some waves have been reported hitting the city of Noto, over 1 metre. Other reports suggesting up to 5 metres is possible. The Japanese public broadcaster NHK TV has warned torrents of water could reach as high as 16.5 feet and has urged people to flee to high land or the top of a nearby building as quickly as possible. And in the last few moments, Japan's Prime Minister Kishida has urged local residents to evacuate immediately. Well, this graphic from the Japanese Meteorological Agency shows the location of the problem. The red cross, which is rather small until we zoom in, shows the epicenter. The purple region shows where a major tsunami warning has been issued. The red region where a tsunami region has been issued. I do just want to also bring you some of the latest headlines crossing from the press conference that is taking place currently with the Japan Meteorological Agency. They've said that people need to be vigilant for the possibility of further earthquakes with an intensity of about 7 for about a week, especially in the next 2 to 3 days. They've said that a tsunami of higher than 1.2 metres was observed in Noto in the Ishikawa prefecture. They've said the risk of fires, landslides, heightening in areas are heightening in areas hit by the earthquakes, and that earthquakes with a seismic intensity of 7 on the Japanese scale have been recorded, and upper 5 readings have been recorded 3 times today. Now, all of this began early today, but that 7.4 reading hit at about 4 p.m., just after 4 p.m. local time. We're now at about 6:20 p.m. local time in Japan. I want to bring in Mark Scorer, who is the Director of Operations at search and rescue charity SARAID. Mark, thanks for joining us. What is your assessment of the scale of these warnings that we're seeing issued by authorities in the government of Japan?
Good morning. Obviously, they're taking it very seriously. As your previous expert mentioned, it's receiving the utmost attention and they're acting very quickly. Japan have a very well-trained response system, network communication system that they're obviously enacting right now. And there are the potentials for secondary hazards following the major earthquake that everyone's on alert for.
Talk to me what a 1.2 metre wave tsunami is like. I mean, is that something that's survivable? Is the fear that they get much higher? We've had warnings of potentially up to 16.5 feet to come from the state national broadcaster.
Certainly, I mean, those sorts of levels that are being discussed are very extreme and could do significant damage and could cause significant loss of life, hence the immediate evacuation orders that have been circulated. But, I mean, in terms of the damage done to the buildings so far, it seems to be more limited and therefore, which is a positive sign at least. That there's no sort of major collapses. But obviously Japan has a very high seismic engineering standard, and the buildings and critical infrastructure are designed to a very high level to withstand such events.
And what is the bigger risk here? Further shocks or tsunami warnings, as we've been talking about?
From what's been developing and from what I'm aware of, it sounds as if the tsunami warning is more of a potential immediate threat. But obviously there is the risk of further aftershocks and events, which could be of a significant magnitude. But again, given the standard of engineering and the development within Japan, we'd be hopeful that they could cope well with it. But obviously a second event shortly after a major first event could damage existingly damaged structures.
And just talk to me a little bit more about that in your position. What is it? What is the quality of the Japanese processes, procedures, and infrastructure in your assessment?
Obviously, they're one of the world leaders in terms of the seismic engineering codes and the design of buildings with means to withstand high magnitude events. They're used to living with earthquakes. They do evacuation drills, preparedness. The communities are very well aware of the potential risks and the potential for major earthquakes. And so they're one of the best prepared countries in the world and will know exactly what they're doing and have people and first responders that will have been ready to respond immediately following this event.
Mark Scorer from the search and rescue charity SARAID, thanks so much for joining us. I want to bring back in Dr. John Nielsen-Wright, Senior Lecturer in Japanese Politics at the University of Cambridge, who's been with us for the last hour. And Dr. Nielsen-Wright, you've been talking about the fact that these warnings are not like anything you've seen since really the 2011 disaster. And I guess that the fact that that's a sign for the worst. As the time passes, as we haven't yet seen further developments, do you get a feeling or a hope that the government is taking this precaution and kicking into action all of its plans more out of caution than anything else, or are we just waiting for developments on that front?
It's very hard to say at this point. I think, as your previous speaker was indicating, in the case of a tsunami hitting the coast of Japan in these concentrated areas of population, the concern is, of course, that this will have a large impact in the immediate vicinity of that peninsula that was mentioned. The government has to assume the worst in order to ensure that people move with the speed that's necessary in order to prepare against that eventuality. The good news, I suppose, is that some of the actual direct impact of the earthquake in terms of the physical destruction to roads and highways seems relatively contained. But of course, it's a country which, of course, with its long coastline and its history of tsunami, in a sense needs to do what it can to protect its populations and to ensure that if the waves of that height reach those concentrated coastal populations, that people will have moved inland swiftly.
Talk to me about that, the way that this threat affects the psyche of Japanese people, whether because of 2011 or just more broadly. Is it something that Japanese people think about and fear every single day? Does it mean that they're prepared for it?
Well, I mean, I think anyone living in such an exposed, seismically vulnerable area is conditioned to take, first of all, warnings from government very, very seriously. And of course, the enormous actual as well as psychological impact of 3/11 has left a lasting and powerful impression on the current generation of Japanese citizens who I think recognize that they have to be prepared to take action. Of course, it is a country which routinely has much lower scale seismic activity. This quake, 7.4, I think was the figure that was cited, is very, very high. And that's why we're seeing the impact on the part of the government and the response of ordinary citizens. I think there will be not necessarily a panic, but a controlled and I think coordinated effort to get people to move swiftly. And the hope, of course, is that this can be something that can be contained. And also with the government indicating that for the next week, there will continue to be seismic shocks that need to be monitored very carefully. The government is trying to prepare the population, I think, to remain as vigilant as possible.
Dr. John Nielsen-Wright, thanks so much for now. We're going to take a very quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. We'll have more on the developing situation in Japan in just a few moments.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people, more active. Live life with Vitality.
Take us back to June the 7th, ahead of the game, because you'd had such an amazing run to the final. Were you quietly confident?
I was, and I remember coming in and saying, how did the other semi-final?
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, let's bring you up to speed on the developing top story today in Japan. Japan has been hit by several strong earthquakes in the north-central area of the country. The quakes hit Ishikawa and nearby prefectures, with one having a preliminary magnitude of 7.6, according to the Japanese Meteorological Agency. A major tsunami warning was then issued for western parts of Japan. This is the moment one of the quakes hit. Office workers seen clinging to desks and computer monitors. As the building shakes around them, there's been a warning that fire and landslides could occur in the areas affected. Well, these are the latest pictures showing some waves coming inland at Toyama City. And we've had reports from the Japanese Meteorological Agency of waves of around 1.2 metres hitting Noto in the Ishikawa prefecture. And the state broadcaster has suggested waves could be of 16 feet due coming soon. We've also had warnings from the Meteorological Agency to expect further quakes in the week ahead, potentially again of up to a 7 reading on the Richter scale, particularly in the next 2 to 3 days. We're going to keep you updated on all of this as it comes in this morning, and we're able to bring in a guest now, Paul Madden, who was former ambassador from the UK to Japan from 2017 to 2021. Ambassador Madden, thanks for joining us. What's your take on the scale of these warnings we've seen from the government and the national broadcaster, the meteorological agency so far?
Well, good morning. Certainly, it does appear to be a pretty significant earthquake. Over 7 is very high. We're going to see continuing aftershocks, and we're also going to see tsunamis. And there are lots of tsunami warnings about. I've been trying to catch up on the Japanese media, and it's obviously too early to see what the eventual outcomes will be in terms of casualties and so on. But I think one thing I would say is that Japan has a lot of earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis as a result of its position on the tectonic plates in the Pacific. And as a consequence of that, it is generally very well prepared. So, for example, most buildings will have been designed to be able to withstand quakes and floods. The Japanese emergency services are very well drilled to swing into operation in these cases, and the public are well prepared too. Even little children in infant schools will have training on what to do in the cases of earthquakes. And the Japanese people, therefore, tend to be in these circumstances quite calm, quite stoic. You don't see panic, you don't see looting.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. And in the 4 years you were there, 2017 to 2021, did you ever experience something which was this scale, or do you feel like this is the most potentially pronounced issue since the 2011 disaster?
Yes, we experienced regular earthquake shocks, and you go to bed every night with a hard hat and a flashlight in your bedroom, and you know the drills about what to do if you get a warning in the night. The public will get flash warnings on their mobile phones if there's an emergency. But this seems to be on a scale bigger than anything that I experienced during my 4 years there. Certainly while I was there, the aftermath of what had happened in 2011 in Fukushima was still very significant to the Japanese people. I visited some of the areas that had been affected by that massive tsunami. I visited the nuclear power station, which had been closed down at the time in 2011.
In terms of going back to your point about how prepared they are for something like this, I mean, to us as Brits, earthquakes is one thing that thankfully is fairly unheard of. Tsunamis even more so. This is a country, though, that you think can prepare for and withstand this sort of thing.
Yes, and of course, the nature of these events can be enormous in terms of their impact. It usually hits by surprise. You can predict where the zones where they're most likely to happen are, but the precise timing of any event and its magnitude is always very difficult to predict. But I think, and so of course they can have a massive impact on populations. And I think in the 2011 one, something like 20,000 people died and 1 million people were temporarily lost their homes. But I think that the Japanese are probably better prepared to cope with this than most countries are. And of course, it's a big, rich country as well. It's got resources. But one thing I would say is today, actually, New Year's Day is probably the most important public holiday in Japan. They don't celebrate Christmas. You see Christmas things around the cities, but it's not a public holiday for most people. So this is the big day. Most Japanese will not be working today. Typically, they will have gone to the local Shinto shrine for their New Year blessings. And so a lot of people will have been out and about, and perhaps not as many people from the emergency sources will be working, but I'm sure they will have been brought in very, very quickly.
And just finally, Mr. Madden, before we let you go, we're going to bring back up the map that marks the epicenter in the Ishikawa region, and the purple around that is where major tsunami warnings have been issued, and the red further on either side is where tsunami warnings have been issued. And we are going to bring that map up for our viewers in just a moment. Talk us through the major population densities in and around that area. Are the big cities there that people will be trying to escape from, or is it thankfully not in an area with too many major cities?
So this part of Japan, the Japan Sea coast, which faces towards the Asian continent, is less populated than the other side of Japan, the Pacific coast, which has all the major cities of Tokyo and Osaka and so on. So it's not quite as high a population density, but nevertheless, you've got some pretty big cities. You've got Niigata, Kanazawa, Toyama City, and so on. So there are significant population centers. And Japan generally has one of the densest populations in the world. So people live pretty closely together in the urban areas. This is also part of Japan which has the most severe winter conditions. So in the coming months, it's going to get very cold there, often very deep snow. And obviously that will impact on the disaster recovery in the weeks and months ahead.
Paul Madden, former UK ambassador to Japan from 2017 to 2021. Thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Let's just remind you of some of the key points that we've learned about this unfolding situation in Japan from a press conference that was held by the Japanese Meteorological Agency in the last half an hour or so. They've warned that tremors will be expected for up to a week, with major earthquakes expected to occur again over the next 2 to 3 days. They also warned of the high risk of fires and landslides caused by the earthquake and reiterated the need to leave areas with damaged buildings. They said that a 1.2-metre tsunami wave had been witnessed in Noto, in Ishikawa, but did not confirm any damage or casualties. We'll also here with me on set throughout Ashna Hiranag, who's been monitoring all of the developments. And Ashna, do just remind us, we've got this map behind us as well, of what we've learnt over the last couple of hours. This hit initially about 4 p.m. local time, 2.5 hours ago.
Yes, so in that time, we've seen a number of aftershocks and also additional alerts that have been issued for this concentrated area within the country. We're talking about an area called Ishikawa, which, as viewers will be able to see on the map behind us, is sort of focused in the very centre of this particular island and the country. The purple line is the most, I suppose, pressing point here. That purple line shows where the major tsunami warning is and remains in place. The red cross that viewers will be able to see in the centre of that purple line marks the epicentre of that earthquake that measured 7.4 on the Richter scale. And that's, as you say, hit at 4 p.m. Japanese time. The red line, as it extends further across the country, that is where the tsunami warning extends. Not a major incident, but still the evacuation order in place there. The yellow line that stretches further north and south of the country, that is where an advisory warning is in place. But just a note on where we are now in terms of timing. So you mentioned it there, 2.5 hours has passed. We're creeping into, so, you know, it's pretty much nighttime over there now. Temperatures very much dropping. When this hit, it was about 6 degrees. Now it's sort of dropping to 1 degree and below, proving that it will be difficult for emergency services and resources that have been deployed there, but also crucially for people too. We heard from the guests that we've been speaking to that, yes, people will be very prepared for situations like this. They'll be well versed in evacuation procedure, but they will have bags packed and so on. But, you know, the nighttime does make situations like this increasingly difficult. And Ashna, also just update us on which other countries in the region have issued statements or warnings relating to this in the last 20 to 30 minutes. To give you an idea of how extensive the warnings now are, so South Korea have advised their residents in the eastern Gangwon province to evacuate immediately. That is a coastal area, so it gives you an idea of where it's stretching there. That's on the east coast. They're warning about levels there in South Korea. North Korea have also been warning their residents to prepare for some sort of activity. They've seen waves of up to 3 foot high in parts of North Korea. But also Russia in the past half an hour to an hour declaring a tsunami warning for its far eastern cities of Vladivostok and Nakhodka. So people there being sort of kicked into gear, really, to try and get moving. Meanwhile, over in Japan, they're still seeing the aftershocks of that initial earthquake, which may well continue for the next 2 to 3 days. But one of the guests we spoke to, a search and rescue expert, it was warning that tsunami warning is the real concern here, given that we've seen waves already measuring some 1.2 metres hitting the area of Noto. Wajima City, pictures coming out of there seem to show cracks in the roads, pavements uprooted. And with regards to those waves, the Japanese public national broadcaster there, NHK TV, are warning that waves could reach as high as 5 metres. They have urged people to flee to high land, a warning that's been reiterated by the country's Prime Minister.
Asha, for now, thanks so much. We're going to take a very quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. Further coverage of this unfolding situation on the other side.
United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want them.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Welcome back. Let's return to the developing top story, the situation in Japan as a 7.4 magnitude quake hits and tsunami warnings are issued for large parts of Japan. Joining me, Ahmad Bostan, the Director of Communication at humanitarian aid organisation The Penny Appeal. Thanks so much for joining me. And your organisation has responded in recent years to major earthquakes.
Good morning, Wilfred. Yes, absolutely. Sadly, there have been a number of earthquakes in recent times, namely the earthquake in Turkey and Morocco, which your viewers will recall from last year. And sadly, we are seeing that earthquakes, tsunamis, natural disasters in general are becoming more and more common as the effects of climate change and other circumstantial factors increase around the world.
Presumably, there's a big difference here between the two earthquakes last year, and the expectation being Japan is relatively well prepared for these sorts of things?
They are, and unfortunately, Japan is no stranger to earthquakes. As you know, there are earthquakes of some kind, 4 or 5 of them each and every year in Japan. Of course, the most severe of them was the earthquake and subsequent disaster that we saw in 2011 in Fukushima, which of course cost the lives of over 18,000 people. So no matter how well prepared a country is, there are still going to be, sadly, casualties and people in need that humanitarian organizations like ourselves, through our partners, will need to help and respond to. And it's incredibly scary for people right now on the ground in the earthquake-affected area, and with the first signs of the tsunami now coming in. Every 10 minutes or so, you're seeing earthquakes alerts being raised in that part of Japan. So it's incredibly difficult for people right now. It's winter conditions on the ground over there, incredibly cold temperatures. Nightfall has just fallen in Japan, as you know, and there are people who are really, really racing against the clock to evacuate and to leave behind their belongings, which is always a very, very distressing and heartbreaking experience for any family, no matter their economic circumstance.
I don't know how well you know Japan's policies in this area, but what do you make of the scale of the warnings that the government, the national broadcaster, the meteorological agency have been issuing?
I think the response has been very, very strong, and there has been a huge amount of work done on the part of the government, the media agencies, and all organizations involved working together, which has been extremely effective. But as I said previously, there is no way in which you can really prepare yourself for what's going to come. You don't know the effects of an earthquake or a tsunami, unfortunately, until it hits and the disaster is there before you, no matter how much preparation you do. But we, as humanitarian organizations, are on standby for that call of international assistance whenever it comes to respond to the needs of the Japanese people.
And just finally, your take on tsunamis and how to prepare for them and the scale of what we're expecting. What we've had reported from the meteorological agency in Japan so far is a 1.2-meter wave in Noto in the Ishikawa prefecture. Warnings from the state broadcaster of waves up to 16.5 feet. What is the scale that we're talking about there of those sorts of waves and the damage that they might cause?
They are very, very significant. So far, we've seen that a lot of the waves that have been seen have been around just over a meter, as you know, but they are set to increase, and that area is set to increase. It can be really, really severe. We'll recall the terrible tsunami we saw in Indonesia nearly over 20 years ago now. And as you know, that cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. And as your previous speakers were saying, the earthquake in itself brings a huge amount of destruction with it. But the tsunami is really the concern. You imagine a huge wave of water that takes out anything in its wake. It is a very, very scary thought. And while people are being encouraged to go to those higher areas, higher lands, it's unclear as to this stage of how many people will actually be leaving their homes and will actually be going to those areas, and whether the areas that they're fleeing to will actually be far enough. As we know, water travels, water can go up, and it's just very, very scary whenever we see any of these instances of tsunamis, because you really don't know the impact it could have. And the most important thing is that all of us, whether we're organizations or individuals, stand ready to help in whatever way we can to whatever needs people will have, because there will be a scale of recovery that will need to be undergone. And as you know, the effects of the Fukushima disaster, the people of Japan are still trying to recover from that. The effects of what happened to the nuclear actors back then are still being felt by the people of Japan. So let's not be under any illusion that this earthquake and tsunami is going to be something that comes and goes. The impact of it will sadly be felt for many weeks, months, if not years to come. But we're ready to help whenever we need to.
Omar Bustan from the Penny Appeal, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated. Well, Ashna's still here with me on set. And Ashna, just remind us of the key facts that we know what unfolded now almost 3 hours ago, about 2 hours and a half ago.
So it's 4 p.m. This is Japanese time, where we first heard that a quake had hit the Ishikawa region of Japan, one of them measuring this magnitude of 7.4 to 7.6. Several aftershocks have been felt afterwards. That quake prompted this tsunami warning for the area, and then prompted a very quick and thorough, sort of unambiguous evacuation warning for thousands of residents on that stretch of that coastline, of that northern coastline. The epicentre of the quake, we know early indications are that there is severe damage there. We've seen pictures of pavements that have been and roads that have been ripped up. I've seen pictures of one house that has collapsed. There has subsequently been warnings issued by a number of other countries, including evacuation in South Korea for residents of an eastern province, Gangwon. Also warnings issued by Russia and also North Korea too, where they're already seeing some waves lapping at the shoreline there. The key warning from the Japanese public broadcaster NHK TV for people within the Ishikawa region of Japan is that these waves could reach as high as 5 metres high, and they are urging people to flee to high land or on top of a nearby building as quickly as possible. And we do know that smaller tsunami waves have already been confirmed to have reached other parts of the coastline, with 1.2 metres recorded in the Noto region.
And just to, as well, remind us what the Prime Minister of Japan has had to say.
In the last couple of hours, Prime Minister Kishida has called on people to heed those evacuation warnings and that advice. He says it is critical for people to get away and that every minute counts.
Ashna Hiranag, thanks so much for that. You've been watching Sky News Breakfast. We're going to take a very quick break here on Sky News, but ongoing coverage of this unfolding situation in Japan on just the other side of this short break.